this computer under More, live on custom streaming service. And there it should be going. Let me pull up YouTube on my other computer.
All right.
Go to KMEA and make sure it's, you know, see if we're there.
I can't hear you, John.
No, shoot.
Jenny Hipple.
District 9,
Hello.
District 10,
Curtis Irvin.
District 11,
Jason Bowles.
District 12.
Corey Zelish.
All right, welcome everybody. The next item on the agenda is approval of our agenda for today. Hopefully you've had a chance to look it over. We did add a couple of late items toward the end of the week that have been included in your latest send out. So I hope you've had a chance to look over the agenda for today. Is there a motion that we accept the agenda?
I make a motion.
Who's that, Patrick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have a second.
Pauletta seconds.
Pauletta seconds. Any objections? Hearing no objections, the minutes are approved. John, are you back with us yet?
I am. Can you hear me?
This committee has met 6 times in the last 9 months. Once a month for the last 4 months. And I commend you all for making this sacrifice. During that time, we came up with a document of guidelines that showed our administrators how we could operate safely. That document was approved. Why did we pour so much time and effort into that document? Because we knew that was a first step toward trying to make this happen, a first step. So we've laid the foundation, but now it's time to build on top of that. Things like proposing to the governor to allow full band rehearsals outside, not just 50 or less. We all know that this is not a contact activity, or it's a low contact activity at best. To propose to the governor to allow contests with spectators. There's already precedent for this. Looking at options that allow for shorter travel for bands, as well as other options that are listed in the agenda today. Now, for any of you that might be thinking of making a motion that we vote today, from there, I imagine, and I don't really know what the course of action would be there. I imagine that either the band council or the KMEA board, or it may just be the KMEA executive committee, I'm not sure, but they'll take that information and they'll decide the fate of the marching band. If the majority says we continue, we do so, knowing that it might take to get all that done. Let me check my text here real quick. Oh. You guys may already know. Okay. All right. So In my conversations this week with Dr. Strobe about today's agenda, he said one thing that he would like to ask the group is this question. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Strobe, but one of the things he mentioned was, what is your biggest fear if the marching season were canceled? And if that does indeed come up in today's meeting, I'd like to go ahead and share my answer to that question now. I'd like for us all for just a minute to think about why band directors and band students do what they do. Why do we do what we do? There are many reasons, of course, but I think the one constant for all of us is the joy of performing. And as we all know, our curriculum is performance driven. We are always preparing for some kind of performance, whether it be marching band, a concert, large ensemble assessment, solos and ensembles, honors bands, jazz band, pep band, chamber groups, all state. There's always something that we're preparing for. Every one of those performance opportunities that I just mentioned to you takes place indoors, except marching band. Now I want you to think about, when was the last time your band had a performance? For most, it was probably your Christmas concert from 2019. That was 8 months ago. And it is very likely that a strong possibility that indoor performances are not going to be allowed for the rest of this year. It's very possible, obviously due to a higher degree of spreading the COVID-19 virus when you're indoors. That being the case, it might be close to 1.5 years before your students have their next performance. I cannot imagine going that long and not experiencing the joy of performing. So to answer John's question, that's my greatest fear. Outdoor performances, on the other hand, are much more likely to be allowed because of the lower degree of spreading the virus. Marching band allows for that performance void to be filled. Why would we not want to pursue this to its fullest, if for no other reason than to provide an outlet for performance for our students? Now, I've looked through the most recent survey results that deal with field trips and plans to participate in SMBC and hosting contests, and I'm sure you have too. I hope you have. And those that participated in the survey were also able to give additional comments to each of their replies. We can talk about the survey in detail later in the meeting, but the main concerns that I take away from the comments were these topics. And there were others, but these are the main ones. KMEA needs to make the decision so I don't have to. There's concerns about money and time and energy that's been put into something that is uncertain.
Hey, Tim, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm
Yeah.
not sure if you've seen the chat.
No.
Yeah, the YouTube stream is not working. I don't want you to get so far into this and we have to repeat it. I don't know. Do we want to wait for YouTube to start working?
Can you hear me?
Yes, John, I can.
So, the YouTube stream's not working. I'm aware of it. However, the meeting is being recorded. And what I'm going to have to do is upload the recording after the fact, and people won't be able to see it and respond in real time, which is the initial idea. This is a persistent problem with the YouTube stream. I found how you preset your YouTube stream, and then when you go to the meeting, you start it. Well, it didn't start, and so there's something else I'm not knowing how to do, and I can't seem to figure it out. And then on top of that, of course, my connection keeps dropping me out of this meeting. So sorry about that. So there's not anything I can do about that right offhand, but the meeting is being recorded.
Okay. I do think it is important that the constituency can review this and see what we're talking about today. And certainly we need to make that recording available to them.
Well, right as soon as it'll be an hour or two after the meeting. after it downloads, and then I can upload it.
Okay. John, do you think
Yes,
that
or
maybe you need
no.
to, I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
Is it possible if we just restarted everything that we could have the live stream working, or you
There's
think not?
something I'm supposed to do to trigger the live stream to pick up. It'd take me 15 minutes to try to explain it, but there's something that I don't know.
Okay. So with that in mind then, so we do need to make this available to everyone that wants to see it, and I'm sure we can do that. Maybe, John, and you may have already done this, do you think maybe while I'm finishing up my comments that you send out an email to the constituency that says we're having problems and it'll be available as a recording later?
I'll do that.
Okay. All right. So I was mentioning that about the survey results and the things, the main topics that I gleaned from that survey were these topics. KMEA needs to make the decision to cancel, so I don't have to. The issue of the time and money and energy that's put into something that is uncertain. Travel concerns. When are full band rehearsals going to be allowed? And I can't host a contest if we don't make money. Those are the big things that I took away from some of the comments that were listed in the survey. There were others, but these were the biggies, and we can certainly talk about others as well. I'd like to touch, and thank you for bearing with me. I don't have too much more, but I just want to make a couple points here and actually cover those main topics real quick with a couple of replies of my own. So as for the concern that KMEA needs to make the decision now, so I don't have to. Many of you know my wife, and you know that she's a very good cook. And believe me, it's come in very handy during this pandemic. She cooks supper most every night, but sometimes she gets frustrated because she gets tired of deciding, what are we going to have tonight? What are we going to have tomorrow? Do I have to lay something out? And she has said to me on many occasions, you decide for me. I don't want to have that responsibility. She just gets tired of it. So you make that decision for me. And I realized then how much I really take her for granted. But I certainly understand her not wanting that responsibility hanging over her day after day. It would just make it so much easier if someone would decide for us. I get that. But if there's one message I want to try to get across to the committee today, it is that it doesn't necessarily have to happen right now. We live in an age of instant information, and with that comes instant gratification. We have fast food, we have remote control, microwave, instant messaging, 24-hour news. We can binge watch our favorite shows and not even have to wait a week for the next episode. We want it now. We want to know our prelim scores before finals. We want it now. And if we can't have it now, we get frustrated. So my message here is, can you be patient? We still have time. KMEA does not have to decide our fate right now. Administrators do not have to decide our fate right now. Some of them may have already done that, but that doesn't mean their minds cannot be changed. But administrators do not have to decide our fate right now. We still have time. So the question is, are you willing to wait a little longer to see if we can make this work? Money, time, energy put into something that is uncertain. I can only speak for myself when I say, if I thought there was a chance that my band, if I were a competing band director, if I thought there was a chance that my band could rehearse full band outside, travel, even if it were close by, compete, be evaluated, and have some kind of in-game event, and stick with safety protocols, I would be willing to try to make that happen for my students. And I would prepare in a different way. We've known for some time now that this pandemic was going to affect how we approach and prepare for a season of uncertainty. And we're band directors. We're problem solvers. So some of you have already taken steps to deal with this new normal. And so some suggestions, like recycle your show, trim it down to 3 tunes, keep it under 6 minutes, reuse your costumes and your silks, recycle props, take up band fees in smaller chunks. For example, take up $100 now in band fees to cover band camp, to cover your staff and your music and the drill. That money would not be refundable. The next chunk is due the next week or the first week of school. You can come up with your own set of guidelines for how you want to take up money in chunks. Just a suggestion. But in this way, you only lose money up to the point that the activity is canceled. And if it is canceled, the kids at least got something out of it. Good training is good training for both now and in the future. You can use the show and the music again next year. Recycle it. Travel. Now, safety protocol for field trips on buses is certainly a concern for school districts. It's more about not just the distance traveled on the bus, but it's the amount of time on the bus that is of concern. But what if, for example, you could stay close to home throughout the season? Today, we will be discussing options that will address those concerns. I'm coming down the home stretch, guys. Thanks for your patience. The other concern was, when will full band rehearsals be allowed? Right now, as of Monday, we are able to have up to 50 individuals gather at a time. You may have heard that the KHSAA came out yesterday saying that fall sports will continue to have non-contact practices in groups of 50 or less, at least through August 2nd. Commissioner Tackett also said that fall sports will happen. Presently, marching band has no guidelines that address more than 50 at a time. We all know that marching band is a no to low contact activity. I see no reason why this committee can't come up with a proposal that requests to allow 100 or more marching band members to gather outside with proper distancing. This is something that we can address and possibly do something about. And then the last topic was, I can't host a contest if we don't make money. What if you were allowed to have spectators? We can propose that to the governor. There is a precedent. There are lots of precedents. What if you were given some financial assistance from the KMEA contingency fund? It's on the table today for discussion. Finally, and I'll shut up for now, there are so many variables involved in what we are trying to address here. And it can certainly be overwhelming and stressful at times. I get that. You get that. And the easy thing would be to eliminate that stress by eliminating the challenge. I don't get that. And I hope you don't either. Our job, as I see it, is to offer suggestions and possible solutions to the challenges and obstacles that come our way. I just want to make sure that we are giving due diligence to our cause, at least until we are told not to by our constituents. That concludes my report. So, George, you're next on the agenda. Do you have anything to report?
Nothing really to report, but John and I have both had inquiries as far as what may or may not happen at the end of October. And Tim, thank you for your statements. I appreciate your work on that. That's all I have.
All right. John, can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
That's for you to say.
You're right.
Yeah, okay. Let me see here. Yeah, I've got a few things to share. First of all, the aerosol study was released yesterday, but as it turns out, and I wish this had been made clear earlier, it was released to the coordinators, the chairs of the study. And that's Mark Speed of Clemson University and also James Weaver of the National Federation of High School Associations. So what they're going to do is, these guys are really dedicated to this. I really, my hat's off to them. Over the weekend, they are going to work together remotely and prepare what they call an executive summary of what they're getting from the scientists. And that will be released Monday afternoon for public. So we'll know Monday afternoon what I kind of thought we would know today. And I'm still not sure it'll be as much as I kind of thought it would be. It might not be as conclusive yet as we wish, but it's going to help, I think, from what just what little James could tell us yesterday on a Zoom call. There will be some advice in there that could be useful. That's that. The process of getting the guidance documents approved. This was interesting, and as you know, challenging and enlightening. Once I got the documents, about a week before I got the documents ready, we finished it, and it was in good shape. I had contacted the Department of Education and the governor's office too, and said, we have this. Do you have any questions or advice? It's coming. And nothing. Well, no, one lady got in touch from the department and said, I'll be your liaison. Send it to me when you're done. So I sent it, and then someone else at the department said, thank you. And then about a little bit later, they said, oh, have you run this by public health yet? And I went, oh, I said, no, I didn't know who to do that with. So who do I talk to? So they got me in touch with Dr. Connie White. If you've read Herald Leader, or, you know, she's always quoted. She's the representative on a lot of these public health issues. And she's been very nice. She's wonderful, very collegial and all this. And so she took it. She found about 5 things that she needed to be adjusted. 4 were extremely simple. One of them was slightly complicated, and I looked into it a little bit. So anyway, I sent her back a revised version. She found 4 more things, so I fixed those. She also said, have you run this by the governor's office? I went, when does it stop, you know? So the Department of Education put me in touch with an associate commissioner in the Workforce and Education Cabinet, and she got, once Dr. White approved it, and Dr. Stack, you've seen him on the governor's broadcast, the bald fellow, he's her boss. He's the Dr. White's supervisor is Dr. Stack, and he wrote and said, we have no further questions on this. They approved it. And so then the governor's office instantly approved it. And so it's all approved. And that was interesting. And both documents, the start of school document had caught up with the marching band one, and they went through together. Any big changes or any further guidance document we make, we do have to keep in mind that that's going to be part of it, that it will have to meet the governor's guidelines, or it will be disapproved, and then we're just rogue. We're just giving advice outside the coloring outside the lines, if you will. And so we can't just say what we wish. We have to use the guidelines and then just apply it to clarinet playing or marching or, you know, whatever. So it is time to do some more. And in fact, of course, our guidance ends June 12th. So I think the point is people need to keep doing that until we come up with something. But since we plateaued or are actually creeping upward, the Department of, the KHSAA moved back the start of sports. And I think that's going to be what we're told. We don't need to be relaxing our guidelines anymore. The bugaboo is the 50-member question. Everyone's asking this because most of our bands, when you add in color guard and everything, is over 50 people. So what do we do? You know, and so I wrote to Dr. White a few days ago after Tim and I talked, and after Jason Bowles and I had talked about this very thing. And I said to her, trying to think how I put it, I wrote it, I sent it to Tim, but I said to her, look, a lot of our band directors, thank you so much for your help before. A lot of our band directors have bands of over 50. If they're ever going to rehearse and perform together, that would be more than 50 in one place. But they would be socially distanced out on the practice field or the marching field. What is there a chance that that's going to come to fruition, that they would be able to do that? And she said she would get back to me, but that was Thursday morning. She wrote back, and I did not hear back from her yet on that question. I don't know if that'll happen, and it could be one of those things where, well, if we let band do it, we got to let somebody else do it. The slippery slope thing. I can imagine their trepidation at having an exception to that rule that's across the entire state, but I don't know. We'll see what she says. I do expect to. I'll prompt her again, and I do expect to hear from her eventually. Yesterday, I saw portions of the KHSAA Board of Control meeting. Well, I watched more of the planning session before the meeting. Then the meeting was on top of something else, and really there was a lot more to gather in their planning session in advance. But that was open records law. That was broadcast, and so you could watch it. It was interesting. It was a good, healthy exchange. These are mostly superintendents and athletic directors and that sort of thing is who's on that. And they govern all the sports. And they did talk about this 6 hour a week limitation from now until August 3rd for each kid. And that's first I'd heard of that. And by the time the day it ended, I'd heard from 2 administrators and and a band director asking me, are we going to go to that 6 hour a week thing? And I told them all, I said, well, this is the first I'd heard of it too. And I've got to find out where that came from. If there's a basic document that's come out that, you know, where did that, how did we come up with that? And see if they're going to tell us we need to be doing that kind of limitation too. Meantime, the principal says, well, my color guard's doing 8 hours on Monday. I said, well, we don't have anything yet. Don't, you know, tell them to be 6 feet or 10 feet apart, you know, just play it safe, wear the masks and no hugging. And, you know, that's the best you can do for now, because that's all we've got, you know, so we'll hope for the best on that. And I'll see what I can find out about that 6 hour a week thing. Where did that come from? Commissioner Tackett will probably answer that question for me.
Okay, guys, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you haven't seen in the chat yet, I have set up a Google Meet because I've got a listserv of directors that have been meeting all summer. And I've set up a Google Meet so that people can see my screen and they can listen in. They just have to promise to stay on mute. And I've put the link to the Google Meet in the chat. So if you've got people you want to share that with because they can't get the live stream, then I will be happy to let them in my Google Meet.
It looks like that might not be a complete URL there, Beth. ggk-ahxv-uni. That doesn't look like enough.
It is for a Google Meet. You have to go to Google Meet and then type that in.
Okay. I'll put that in the YouTube chat, I guess. Okay, I'm done, Tim.
Okay, thank you, John.
Yep.
Next item on the agenda is unfinished business. I don't know of any unfinished business. Do any of you know of something that we need to cover from our last meeting?
There is none. There was nothing. Nothing that was left open.
So moving on to new business. Under A, this section, it says what still needs to happen in order to make competitive marching band possible. This is not a proposal. This is just a reference for us to speak to as we go through the meeting today. So I think that, and we can add to this, but I think we all agree that I've mentioned it, John's mentioned it, we've all talked about it, the idea of being able to have full band rehearsals outside. The concerns about, these are things that have to happen in order for us to have a competitive marching season. Bus transportation, sufficient number of contests available, and of course the idea of having spectators. So these are all things that we'll address as we move through the agenda. So I'm gonna go ahead to the B part of this. And it says proposal for allowing contests with spectators. And again, this is not a proposal. It is something that if we decide to come up with a proposal that we might include in that proposal. And again, we can reflect back to the things that are listed in the A part of this as well. So it's not an actual proposal, and I would really welcome any input from the committee. This will probably involve, if we decide to come up with a proposal, this will involve probably a task force. That's what we did for the guidelines document, and it worked out pretty well. So, you know, we could spend the rest of this day detailing what a possible proposal might be for this particular situation. But I think for today, we can talk about each topic and just get some basic input from you guys so that maybe our task force can take that and use that as fodder to come up with a specific proposal. So what I'll do is, these are the high points of things that might come out of a possible proposal dealing with spectators and contests. So I'll list them and then we can talk about each one. So 50% capacity. Do we want 50%? Do we want more? Do we want less? If we do come up with an idea of having spectators as part of a proposal, obviously we would require that spectators would wear masks. There would be temperature checks before entering the stadium. I took some of this from the Louisville soccer team, which has had permission to open up their stadium to spectators. Families can sit together separated from other groups by 6 feet. Clear the stadium after each class. This is something that we mentioned before, talked loosely about in another meeting. And I'll come back to that again in just a second. Number 6 is concessions. Now, this is a pretty big ball of wax. There's a lot of safety protocols here. Not sure if we want to tackle this today or not. My daughter is the events coordinator for KET, and she deals quite a bit with the safety protocols and serving food and that sort of thing. So I do have resources available to that we can use if we decide to tackle that part of a proposal.
Tim, I think we could probably piggyback on KHSAA on that. That was brought up a little bit yesterday, and Commissioner Tackett talked about certain things would not be possible. Nachos would not be possible. It would be prepackaged things. And so I think whatever guidelines they come up with almost naturally would be the kind of thing we could just probably copy and paste.
Understood. Thanks. And then there's one thing I forgot to include. It's not on your agenda. It's not listed down there. I'm just going to call it a number 7. You know, I mentioned earlier the idea of full band rehearsal. Well, that's not addressed in this proposed proposal. So I forgot to include requesting full band rehearsals as part of this proposal. And this, I think, should be included in this same document. So what I'm going to do now is I just want to get some opinions and some insight and kind of go through these points here and see what your feelings are. So the first point is the idea of requesting spectators. And I've put up here 50% capacity. The floor is open for discussion.
Which part are we discussing?
The idea of asking for 50% more or less spectators at an event.
I think that's what the KHSAA is asking for too. I'm a little bit fuzzy on where that stands, but I think they're asking for that, but I don't know if it's been granted.
My understanding is that Mitch Barnhart at UK spent part of this week and some of last contacting season ticket holder type people, and that their plan is to have 50% capacity at Commonwealth and at Rupp. And I think that's, you know, that number of 50%, maybe that's where KHSAA's 50% is coming from too. But I certainly think that a proposal like this, having 50% capacity, I think that's doable, and maybe even more. Who knows?
I thought of one more thing too. Sorry to keep, but I've had my feet in several puddles on this deal. When Melissa and I this week talked to the folks at Whitney Hall about the possibility of all state band, choir, orchestra concerts, and we said, how many people will you be able to seat in your audience? And she said, well, it's a little fuzzy, but what we've got to do is go every other row to get 6 foot front to back distancing. And then a party may sit together. So a family of 1 or 2 or 3 may all sit, sit next to each other. But then between parties, there needs to be 2 empty seats so that from me to the next guy over is 6 feet. Each seat's about 2 feet wide. So that came to more like, I think, 30% when they just did the averages on the size of their parties. That came to about 30%. But it wasn't based on a percentage. It was based on distancing, and so the 50% may that's what they've come to. So I think they're probably these Rupp Arena would probably be based on the same thing since it's indoors, and I don't know about outdoors. It could be that 50% turns out to be ambitious, overly ambitious, but I think we have to watch KHSAA, I'll bet you, to find out where that goes. And what they let them do, they'd let us do, of course.
So to save time and effort in trying to come up with asking something specific that we want, would it not be easier just to ask to be granted the same thing that KHSAA is granted, that we would follow the guidelines that are given that they come up with?
Either that, or if we find out what they're asking, just again, copy and paste.
Yeah, that sounds like a possible plan there. And while I think it is important that we, so much of what we do is related to KHSAA, I don't want us to get so attached to that model that we don't confine it to just that, knowing that our activity is different than the fall sports.
That's true, but we're using the same facility.
Right,
So,
I get it. I get that totally. In this particular regard, I think that might be a wise thing to do, Beth.
I think the biggest difference on ours is contact, low contact, high contact, and the biggest similarity is probably the venue use, more than likely. And there are other things that are similar and other things that are different.
Right. Anybody else have something to say about this particular aspect of it? Okay, good point. Actually, the next 3 through 4, 2, 3, and 4 would also fall under what we just talked about, the idea of spectators wearing masks and temperature checks before entering the stadium, where they can sit, the spacing. Again, that would also follow KHSAA guidelines, I think. So I don't know that we need to discuss those bullets.
I think 6 would fall underneath that as well.
Yeah.
Tim, one thing I wanted to bring up, of course, our district, I think everybody knows now, our district already decided to cancel the season for us. One of the biggest things about that was that they were not going to let us host contests at our school, and not because of a spectator issue, but because of so many students from around the state coming to one place that have different exposure levels. With football, I think our biggest football teams in the state, correct me if I'm wrong, have about maybe 60 kids on the team. That's the biggest football teams. And, there's 2 teams coming to one school for that. I have 120 kids in my band. And so I get a contest going with 15 bands, and Lafayette's there, Madison Central's there, we're there, Estill County, all of our normal folks that come to our contest. That's a lot more kids to keep track of throughout the day. It's not just spectators that we're thinking about. It's the actual participants of the contest.
Thank you for
Be
sharing
a
that,
difference.
Michael. Thank you. Input from anybody? Corey, you put something on my chat there. You want to speak? Corey Zillich, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think that was kind of the sentiment from our principal at Eastern about hosting a contest, was not really the spectators, but just having all the kids in the building at the same time, you know, sharing the changing areas that we have, water stations, you know, all these kids come into contact in the same contact points throughout the competition. So they were more concerned about that than the spectators.
And kind of to bounce off that, you know, I know that we mentioned no changing on campus in our document back in June, but are we really going to ask kids to stay in their band uniforms for a full day in September? I have a hard enough time keeping mine in their uniform for the 2 hours that I make them wear them.
Yeah, I know a lot of band directors have their students just change on the bus. We did talk about that before as a possibility. You know, you come in your street clothes, and when it comes time to get off the bus or it's time to go warm up, you change into your uniforms then. You know, there are really still a lot of options that might address that. You know, we could talk about eliminating band uniforms altogether if it came to it. You know, you don't have to wear band uniforms. They're optional. Costumes are optional. Those are things we can discuss as a possibility. Also in this, kind of relative to what you all are saying, and it would address your concerns partially anyway, and that is under 5, we had talked before about clearing the stadium after each class. And if indeed, it doesn't stop all those different bands from being at your site, but it would prevent all of those bands being at your site at the same time. So for example, if Class A is run, awards are given, clear the stadium. I'm just throwing these out here. Clear the stadium, okay? Maybe a cleaning that takes place. The bathrooms are clean, water fountains are sanitized. I'm just throwing these out here. And then you close the stadium and then reopen it an hour later, and Class 2A comes in, and you run the same scenario. So in that regard, you have an opportunity to clean and sanitize in between. You do have the opportunity. You're not having everybody there at the same time. So there are options still out there. I certainly understand the concerns that you brought forward as well. Anybody else have comments on that? Come on, I don't want this to be me against the world. I need everybody's input on this.
With the clearing stadium after each class, after hearing talk from other band directors, I'm kind of thinking also that we're going to be dealing with less bands. As Michael and Corey said, you know, there are superintendents and principals that are pulling their band programs. So I think my thought process is if there are less bands, I think clearing the stadium is something that's very possible, especially if we consider contests that do happen don't have a prelims and finals set up as a possibility. That's going to open up that timeline for us to make something possible, if that's the course we choose to go to make something happen for our kids.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Jenny. I do think that if this scenario plays out, we probably would have to eliminate finals. It would be an all-day affair, just a one-shot deal. So, anybody else?
Yeah, Tim, this is Joe Craig here. One of the things that I know my district and several ones in Northern Kentucky are doing, I don't know about other parts that have been participating in athletics, are having to sign a waiver when they come up to practice that basically absolves everyone involved of liability if anyone were to contact coronavirus and so forth. I don't know if that's something that's going on in other districts or not in the state, but you know, hosting any kind of competition, obviously, you know, our band boosters and our schools, you know, that might be something that they're going to ask of spectators and people involved is, you know, if something does happen in one of those events, anything about reliability for the boosters or the school program.
Thank you, Joe.
And,
Hey,
I'm sorry, Jason, you go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I don't know that we've heard a lot from any of the other contest managers, but that seemed to be a major concern from a contest manager in our district. And sparing all the details, if there was any, if the capacity was reduced in any way, he just says, financially, it's absolutely impossible. One of the other concerns had to do with policing all of the distancing requirements, the mask wearing, the temperature taking, everything that would go along with that. So I'm just curious, maybe from a contest manager's standpoint, other than the one that I referenced, what are some thoughts on that?
The other thing that I think that we have to be careful of, and I think that a lot of people are getting mixed up about, is we're not making decisions about any other contests other than regionals and state. If KMEA chooses to cancel those two events, those two weekends, that in no way impacts anybody from choosing to have their own competition.
True.
Because KMEA doesn't control anything but the sanctioning aspect. So competitions outside of those two events can still happen. We're not making any decisions about those. We're just making, if a band chooses to compete, they can still compete at a local contest. I was talking to somebody yesterday and I said, if 4 or 5 bands want to get together and have a competition, and it's that important to them, and I know some people have talked about legitimacy of their band programs, tied to the competition aspect. If KMEA does chooses to cancel these 2 weekends, people can still get together, pay a fee to have a contest happen, pay $200 each or whatever, so there's enough money that the contest can happen and still compete. So I think we need to make sure that we're differentiating. We're not choosing anything about a competitive season. We're only choosing something for those 2 weekends.
Comments?
That's the only thing I guess I'd say to that is, in addition to the sanction, there's always all of the rules and regulations that this group puts together for those KMEA sanctioned events that are not state championship level. So if you were to cancel the state championship events, then basically you'd also have to say that any contest would not necessarily have to follow those guidelines that are in those. Because like you said, that would be different than a normal KMEA sanctioned contest.
That's right. Because people do that already anyway. Lafayette has a very fine non-sanctioned contest. And they make up their own rules. And there's local contests all around that choose to have their own rules. Sometimes they follow the KMEA guidelines, sometimes they don't.
Jason brought up the idea earlier before Beth chimed in about the concerns about having to police the event. Does anybody have any comments about that? As far as, we're just speaking as a teacher, and many of you right now are having to pull that job off of policing. You're policing your students every day when you rehearse, and making sure that they're following all the right protocols. Maybe you have band parents that do that and help you with that. We've talked about that as well, as who is able to help you keep safety precautions going. Any comments to address Jason's concerns?
John, does KMEA have enough money to hire people to help with the policing at all the events?
Sure we do. Whether the emergency money is deemed to have been put back for that purpose, whether this is an emergency, would be something for elected decision makers, possibly the state board, to decide.
Okay, anybody else?
Some of the feedback I've gotten from my district, some folks that have already started back have talked to me about how compliant their students are, how compliant everybody that's involved with this process right now. If they have a student slip or anything, they may say mask up or something like that. But I think some of this, because the students want this to happen in a lot of places, I think there's a lot of self-policing that would happen. I know, just talking with different people about the mask mandate that went into effect yesterday, I've gotten reports of some people that have said, hey, I was out and about and everywhere I went, people were wearing masks. And then I've gotten reports from, hey, I went to this store and they got into the store wearing a mask, but as soon as they got in there, they decided to take it off. I don't know if this is something we really can police, but I do think that in an effort to try to move forward, that there would be a lot of self-policing that would go on. I don't know if hiring people or designating people to police, I don't know how necessary that would be. Maybe I'm just really naive about that.
So, something to consider. If you look at groups that have already started back and different activities that have already started, I'm a big sports fan, so I initially go to college football that's already started back with, some different team workouts and, different things like that. Major League Baseball, even with protocols, things are going to flare up. Cases are going to present themselves. So even with protocols, I just want everybody to make sure that they're, really, really aware that even with protocols, it's not foolproof. So we still are assuming that risk with protocols and with, additional policing and everything like that. So I just want to make sure, look at who's already started and issues that they've had, and maybe we can learn from those. But just look at who's already started.
Thank you, Grant. Any other comments?
I'm wondering, thinking about how many bands are in one place at one time, and I'm wondering if maybe the task force that puts this together could come up with additionally something to propose that limits how many bands are on a school campus at one time, if that's a huge concern. So if we are going to put together an idea that you don't need uniforms or color guard costumes and those things, so then theoretically maybe we could come up with a way that there's a band that is in warm-up and a band that's on the field with that timeline, and that's it. And they just cycle through. I don't know if that's possible or not, but I kind of feel like once we get that task force going, as long as we have those lists of concerns that we're hearing, maybe we can come up with a solution to those things.
Thank you, Jenny, for offering that. Appreciate that. And that's something indeed that the task force can think about. Just out of curiosity, how do you all feel about the idea of making uniforms optional? Is that something we don't need to address, or feelings on making uniforms and costumes optional?
Technically, they already are.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
There was a year at Harrison County that our uniforms didn't come in on time, and we wore black shorts and our t-shirts for the first 2 weekends.
I'm thinking old school college band director here that uses the same uniform week in and week out. So accept my oldness for a minute. Anybody else?
they technically are optional, but making a statement from the organization makes it easier for ensembles to go out without the uniform. I remember several years ago in blistering heat at a BOA competition, BOA contacted all the directors and said, because of the heat, don't worry about uniforms. And that made it an easier decision for directors to say, okay, we're just going to go out in our t-shirts and our shorts. So I think it's a good option to have there, especially because of the logistics of changing rooms, where to change, limiting exposure for those points, as Corey pointed out, what they talked about at Eastern.
Just kind of to piggyback off that, I did talk to all the band directors in my district already about some of the stuff that we're talking about today. And somebody brought up that, you know, even subconsciously, even if we say that everything's optional, I think subconsciously judges may think something looks more effective because someone has a uniform on. How do we know that? We don't. But, you know, you go to state or you go to a local contest and band A scores better and they happen to be wearing uniforms, people are going to be upset.
Personally, I would not mind my parents and kids being upset if they thought that because they didn't wear uniforms, their points were deducted for knowing what we're dealing with for this particular season. So in my mind, it's not a deal breaker for me as far as trying to make it simple.
In my talks with people regarding this, you know, one idea that has come out of the discussions is, you know, if you have a group that has all the bells and whistles, and allowing them to compete, say, in this lane, but now, you know, here's a division for people that don't want to take that financial risk. You know, that's a concern that a lot of people in my district have, is pouring money into those kinds of things and then losing that money because something gets canceled or whatever. And, you know, I think for, you know, everybody's situation is different. You know, some people maybe already have stuff going. Some people don't have anything going. And so being able to maybe have separate divisions of, here are the people who have all the bells and whistles, here are the people that don't. Another thing in terms of all this, and I think it's interrelated, as Michael's kind of pointed out, that, you know, effect is inherent in the sheets and the judges. It's kind of hard not to take those things in consideration. So, you know, looking at this may, you know, and we've talked about this as an option in past meetings, and I think, you know, and it's look on the agenda for a little bit later, but I think they're interrelated in terms of maybe this is we just march, we just play, and nobody has any bells and whistles, or if you do, there's no effect captions at all. I think looking at what's being judged, what judges you have, or creating separate lanes could be two ways to address that.
So Curtis, to do that, it might be as simple as this particular lane, as you mentioned. This is for these particular bands will be judged only on execution of music and visual. And any other bands that don't want to fit into that category, you're going to choose. You have the choice of being in the category that does have an effect judge on music and visual. Is that what you're maybe suggesting?
Yeah. Yes. Like you could have, you know, these group of bands that, you know, they are able to maybe, you know, we're going to reuse old costumes, or we're going to duct tape stuff together and call it a prop. You know, we're going to go out there and we're going to compete as close to a normal version of the product that we would produce. Or we're going to, you know, we're in this lane over here, and we're going to come out and we're going to play three numbers, and, you know, we want to be evaluated on who marched and played the best, which is, you know, really what this should be.
So with that, you know, doesn't that create almost another circuit within the circuit, or like a festival class champion for things too?
Yeah, and I think that is one of the problems with that, and could create more headache than it's worth, which is why, you know, eliminating some captions might be a quicker, easier way to go about that.
Okay. Thank you, Curtis. Any other input on that? Okay.
Oh, Tim, I did have someone bring up that texted me because we were talking about a waiver for stuff. If we made it possible for folks to purchase tickets, if we are able to move forward with SMBC, if they purchase their tickets online, can't there be a waiver that's signed electronically when they purchase their tickets, even for quarterfinals? I know we don't typically do online ticket purchases for quarterfinals and semifinals, but this may be the year to do it if we can include that sort of thing.
Okay.
Well, we haven't established yet if a waiver is the kind of thing you need to do. I think, again, we might look to KHSAA and see what they think is wise, because they are determined to have competitions if they can. So I bet they're thinking about that. But online ticket sales is a really good idea because there's no person-to-person contact. And that also is something we should probably look into regardless of the waiver question.
I would like to speak to the elimination of the effect category. Another reason that that's a really good idea is because that is the most, I mean, other than the staff for a band, that is the most expensive part of the marching band show. And for a lot of groups where maybe they've lost their major source of revenue, that would help hold down the expense of competing. Also, for people who have lost jobs in an area, you know, some areas have really been hit hard and they're just having a hard time paying their band camp fees. The elimination of the effect category would really help a lot of bands in that area.
Thank you, Beth. I'm trying to think where that might come under as far as changes to be made. That's almost a separate entity under itself for this committee to probably to decide whether we want to change the number of judges and what is being judged. It's a good point.
It'll also make it cheaper to have a contest because you don't have to pay those judges.
A little later in the agenda, we do offer reducing the number of judges, and that's we can talk about that a little more in depth when we get there. So I'm going to table that to then. We can include that in that discussion there, unless anybody has an objection to that. Okay. So any other comments on this particular area that we're talking about right now? So my thought process is that we would have a task force that would address these things that we've talked about concerning well, all the things we've talked about. We will, John, here's my question to you. I know that we're going to follow on the coattails a lot of what KHSAA does, but shouldn't we come up with a proposal that this is what we think we'd like to have happen? Or as far as 50% capacity, do we need to just wait and see what KHSAA does, or should we make a suggestion in the form of a proposal?
I think that it's going to take, of course, a few days. I don't know what timeline that this alleged task force. You know, haven't formed it yet, but I don't know what kind of timeline that would be. In the meantime, I think we compare notes with KHSAA. The reason that it's important to stick by what they're, to keep them in mind, is because when Julian Tackett was having his meeting with superintendents, many times they ask about bands. They think of it, you know, they just know that it's involves some after school rehearsing, and it involves some performing, it possibly involves some travel, and they think of them as similar. And we, as we said earlier, there are similarities, there are differences as well. They're competing, of course, skill to skill. We're competing production skillfully executed with production skillfully executed. We have a whole production between us and them. So there are differences. But in terms of things like audience capacity, if they come in at 50 and we come in at 60, or if they're rejected at 50 and we ask for 4, or they're accepted at 50 and we came up with 40, you know, it just doesn't make sense probably to those who are deciding, if we're not asking for the same thing in terms of the venues, the concessions, what could be sold, and what the lines would be, things like that. So it's time to reach out to Julian. He's been very collegial and very complimentary of what we've been doing, and appreciative, as others are too. So that's what I think. We should come up with a proposal, but before we send it somewhere, try to find out where KHSAA is at.
All right. Thank you. So if things go as planned, my thought process is to form a task force. And I know that we're all in the midst of rehearsals now, or about to be. And the task force would probably have to meet probably at nights or at night to do this, while other rehearsals might be going on, or convenient times where task force members can get together. But we will address the issues that we've just talked about under this category. Anything else under this particular section that someone would like to offer input on? Okay. Just a couple of bullets still underneath this section. Let's suppose we do come up with a proposal, sent into the governor, the public health passes it, and the governor passes it. Will contest hosts still want to host? So it might be a good time. And the other part of it is, if only a handful of contests are available, how do we proceed? And we've touched on that a little bit today. So I hope you've had a chance to look, just referring to the survey. I hope you've had a chance to look at that. Here is my takeaway from it, and certainly you can offer your input as well on this. As far as marching band goes, of course, there was a section on, will your administration allow you to travel to contests? And I have written down here, I took these notes, 52% don't know, 9% haven't asked their administration, and 16.5% said yes. So there's 78% of those that were surveyed that either don't know, or they haven't asked, or they're willing to. Okay, the other 22% fall into several different categories of no or what ifs and that type of thing. So that's field trips. Another question on the survey was, at this point, do you plan to attend SNBC? 35% said yes, 45% said maybe. That's a total of 80%. 20% said no. So right now, at this point, 80% are either unsure or they say yes. So it's obvious that there is still some up in the air uncertainty to this. And then finally, is your school going to allow you to host? We've been touching on that a little bit before now. 22% have said yes, 78%. The rest don't know. Nobody has said no. 78% have said they don't know. And then with school permission, will you host? If you had school permission, would you host? 67% said yes. 33% said maybe. And nobody said no. So I see Beth has said that those percentages may have changed now, and that's certainly worth discussing. But that is based on survey results that have been sent to us today. So will contest hosts still want to host? And if only a handful of contests are available, how do we proceed? Now, again, we've touched on this a little bit already, but any further comments on this aspect?
I have a program in my district that's a larger program. They don't host a KMEA contest. They host a mid-state show. Their biggest thing is they just don't think that they would be able to turn a profit with the number of bands that would attend. And with all of the restrictions that could be put on it, the number of fans that would even come to attend to watch. So that's where they are. They're likely not going to host a mid-states contest, even if mid-states does have a season, just out of the fear of not turning a profit. So I know that's in this category, but that's where one of the larger programs in our district is.
For us, we typically have somewhere between 15 and 18 bands at our contest. It'll already have to be pared down to just we usually do a prelims final show, so it will obviously be pared down to just one round of competition. Out of the groups that we had attend our show last year, 6 of them have already canceled. So that's worrisome. That being one of our largest fundraisers of the year.
I don't envision administrators willing to foster a potential outbreak from a contest at their school. I would just imagine that would be a thought on anybody's mind when a band director is coming to ask to have a contest on campus. But I know, like, for Eastern bands, our contest is a very large budget item on our budget for the year. And without having that contest, that kind of breaks the season. We wouldn't be able to afford to do marching band like we usually do. And I would imagine that would be the case for most other bands that are hosting contests.
That was kind of the deal breaker for us too. When they said that we couldn't host contests, and I was like, well, then we can't afford to have a band. Our school board doesn't, I don't know how everyone else's situation is, but our school board doesn't really financially support the band. And so we host 2 or 3 contests a year so that we're able to do what we do. And, with a limited amount of people, that's going to really affect things. I also try to think about, we have a lot of moving around going on in the state right now. Not a ton as usual, but still a fair amount for what's going on right now. I worry about, new band directors in a place or non-tenured band directors trying to host a contest. And if something pops up, that's not going to be too great for them moving forward with their career in that school district, possibly.
Other comments?
Paulette is trying to talk, but your mic is.
Okay. Is your school going to allow football games? Michael.
Right now, yes. But kind of like I said before, that's a much smaller number of people there. And right now they're looking at football games without spectators. And so if that happens too, I also imagine that the rest, because at our school, the gate from the football games funds the rest of the sports for the school year. And so I imagine if they stop making money off football, then everyone else is going to get canned too.
Plus, it's a lot cheaper to host a football game than a marching band contest.
I'm not sure that's true, but there are quite a few expenses for hosting a football game. Actually, we just don't know because we don't do it. But the officials cost a great deal. The groundskeeping has to be done, of course, each week. The equipment. There are a bunch of things. They have a pretty high budget. But Michael's point, I think, is the big one, that if you had 2 football teams and no audience, that's maybe 40 strangers coming on your campus as compared with 10 bands, which is hundreds and possible audiences anyway. I think football is expensive, actually. That's my guess.
Joe, were you going to say something? Joe Craig, were you going to say something? I thought you were going to say something a minute ago.
No. I was just making sure Pauletta knew her mic was muted when she was making a comment.
Yeah, sorry. In the middle of all that, also had a relative from Ohio that showed up at the door too. So I missed a lot of that. But it just, okay, I'm going to say this, and Tim started out with earlier. I think that there's so many obstacles that we would have to jump across to be able to have a marching season. But at the same time, I think we need to really keep in consideration the fact that administrators need to know that we are important and that we're not just throwing in the towel and giving up on things, because there's too many administrators that would be so willing to just cut the program, period, and say, forget it, it's not happening, we don't need you, we need the money elsewhere. And that's happening across the state, and especially in the outer realms of the state. So just put that out there. I think we really need to try to keep it and make whatever considerations that we have to make to be able to do that for the bands that can compete.
I think that's true. But, I think, Pauletta, just as well as anybody on here, in a small place, it's real hard to get this thing going, period. And so I really wonder, if we do this and then we get to September and we have to call it, or mid-August and have to call it, a lot of these smaller programs that we have in Kentucky aren't going to be able to make up that money. And we may bankrupt their band. And then we have less band programs anyway because people can't afford to fund themselves. So I worry about that too.
Tim, we're starting to eke out what you asked earlier. What are people's fears?
Yeah.
Tim, I'm gonna, if it's okay, can I jump in?
No, you may not, Joe. Go for it.
Thank you, sir. I'm looking at it obviously from a little bit different lens, from the band chair side of things. When you were talking about my fear or concern is what's going to be happening during the school day. I don't know if any of you have seen the Peabody document that came out from Johns Hopkins about what they're recommending for their students there. Their UC, CCM, UC Health, and the Cincinnati Symphony are doing like their own independent aerosol study, kind of into collaboration. I know who's running that. They're not allowed to tell us much, but there's definitely some concerns about indoor playing. And of course, we're waiting on the big one to see what that tells us. But if that tells us bad news for what goes on the school day, I'm more concerned about that than whether or not my band goes to a competition or not. Because I feel like if that's the case, if we get to the point in our indoor rehearsals, performances are compromised, I'm going to be looking at what can I do during the summer, fall, when the weather is nice outside with my kids to, value the program in that regard. Whether it's, if the drum line goes and plays cadences at the football game and the color guard does a flag routine there, that's great. That's awesome. But for for the rest of the wind musicians, it's like we're going to have to potentially only play outside for a while. That's a big concern. The other big piece of it, of course, is just, knowing how my district is, and I'm sure a lot of the other big districts will follow suit. These new, basically knowing from now until August the 3rd, if I practice, it's going to be outside and at a max of 6 hours and pods of 10. I don't know how in the world anyone could put together a show anything like what we are used to doing with that, considering what we would normally do in this amount of time. So I guess my big concerns are knowing we're going to have to follow those KHSA guidelines on times and numbers. That's not going to change for my district. It'll be the same. So obviously the competitive side from that, but then the bigger one, even bigger than that, is what's going to happen during the school day and how do I help prevent that? Because I think that's going to be more detrimental to our program than anything. Even as bad as it would be for Raleigh not to have a competitive marching band, not being able to play the school day is exponentially worse.
I would agree wholeheartedly on that, Joe. Just a question about the one thing you mentioned about, you think you were not going to have enough time to get a show ready if we don't know anything. So I'm just throwing this out there, and this all for all of you to think about. Let's suppose that it is not until August 3rd that we are able to have rehearsals outside, whether it be full band or not. So just looking at the calendar, you have the first official contest, if there is one, would be probably the second weekend in September. So knowing that we don't have any maximum or minimum time for performance, do you not think that if indeed we are given approval to practice at the beginning of August, your band program could not have something worked up by the first or second weekend in September, whether it be one tune or half a tune? So I think that's where I'm going with this. Joe, I'll ask you, do you think that's possible?
I think there are a lot of things that are possible.
But you just said you didn't see how you could get a show together.
Well, I mean, in terms of how I say it, like if I only had, we've seen middle school honor bands put on concerts in, just a few hours time. So you can do things, but how different it would be from what we are used to, I guess, is what I'm saying on that side. Is that from the kids' perspective as well. Like they're smart, they're going to know it's not as good. When you're under those kind of constraints, basically, with also for my group, I won't be able to get them all in a single day outside. And this time, obviously, with the weather, with storms, heat, all those things, we follow all those guidelines. So as soon as it gets above that heat index, they shut us down. We'd have to send them home. So we've only got an hour at a time. Those groups, my money is obviously less than like everybody's because of the financial implications. So I have less staff to spread the band out. So I can't the biggest group I can have is 50. So that's 45 kids. So that would be nine instructors and 45 adults. So I have enough to do that. So that's the biggest group I could get through at a time. So basically the way I'm looking at it is basically it would take us several weeks to get done when we would get done in several days this new restrictions, at least for what we're used to. But I think another consideration is we keep talking about fall sports as part of this part and parcel. My guess is that if they resume any kind of contact on August the 3rd, they're going to delay the start of their seasons. They're not going to start them on the second or third week of August. So if they push them back into mid-September, administrations are probably going to maybe be putting those together with us as well. So some of those earlier contests could definitely be in jeopardy. But I guess in my opinion is that, if we're not able to start until August the 3rd with anything close to what we've normally done, I would imagine it would take the Raleigh band close to mid to late October to be ready to present much of anything. That's my guess, I guess, with all the weather and other things that we'd have to deal with, and not with that, because I'm also looking at it as not being able to go inside either, to have those options to even work on music indoors, because right now we're not allowed to do that. So that's not going to change for my district until August the 3rd.
I'm a piggyback off what Joe just said too. I worry, we're a first week contest host, so is Austin and Southwestern usually, Boyle County a couple times. I think that we run the risk, because right now it's hard enough to get people to come out the first week, for me anyway, to where we'll make enough money. I send out invitation after invitation and pull teeth and promise people I'll come to their contest if they come to mine. those sorts of things. And if we're not starting full band until the beginning of August, I don't think people are coming out to those first shows. I think the first 3 weeks are probably scrapped for contests.
Well, I kind of wanted to, sorry, I didn't clarify this the right way, but I'll add what Michael just said. Because the thing is right now, we're allowed to have 50 kids on our campus, but only in groups of 9 and an adult. So for me to go to a band competition, they're going to have to let that group go up to 150 for me to take the band to a contest. So I don't think that's going to, I could be wrong, but I doubt that, on September the 12th, that's going to be allowed. Maybe I'm wrong, but so that's one of the things I'm looking at is because I'm going to have at some point of practice time where the whole group can be together. But at least for my district, if KHSA is only allowed in groups of 10, then that's what we're going to do. I mean, they're not going to let us have a group of 150 while the other groups can only have 10, just for the optics alone. But I think the other big piece of it is the reason those groups are all so small, and this is why I was asking my administration, because Tim, you were talking about asking for bigger groups. The reason that we were told that is basically the protocols of trying to limit the spread before school starts. Because if there's a group of 50 together and one of those kids gets it or the adult gets it, they have to quarantine that entire group of 50 for at least a significant length of time. According to the KHSA guidelines, if they're little pods of 10, someone catches it, that whole group has to go away. So if we have a group of 150 kids practicing at the same time in close proximity without masks and those things, there's a potential of them saying that if someone in that group catches it or enough, all of those kids have to be sent home.
And that is before school. Once school starts, because of tracing and because of the fact that kids from all grade levels and throughout a school participate, it could very well be that somebody on the football team, if somebody in band or whatever, it doesn't just quarantine the band, it can close the school down.
Well, and here's another thing too. I don't know how it's going statewide, but here in this area, we have, they're canvassing the parents and surveying if you're going to send your kid to school. And we have school systems in this area that are at 50% of they're not sending their kid to school. So if you have a school like North Hopkins that's 1,050, now you're looking at 525 of actually showing up to school. That's something we haven't talked about also.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, I guess the question I have is, do we have to be competitive for band to be relevant?
I mentioned that when I was on the phone with Dr. Strobe the other day. I know everyone's freaking out about competitions because it's what we're used to. But when I talked to my kids and told them that we were going non-competitive, after a conversation, they were fine. And when I told them that it's going to be less of a time commitment, all the older kids that have jobs were super excited. And, I said too, I don't have to compete to teach. I'm still going to teach my kids. We're still going to have March. We're still doing the same show. And it's going to be awesome. But who knows who will see it. But I'm just teaching my kids. I'm not worried about the public eye of it.
Yeah, Murray High just plans on having an outstanding football band, and we will perform for whoever is allowed to come see it. And that's what we're going to do. But it's like Michael said, a lot of it is going to be on how you present it to your administration, how you present it to your parents, and how you present it to your students.
Thank you.
I think it's important for all of us. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Curtis.
I was just going to say, I think it's important for everybody to be upfront with their kids and their parents and their administrations in terms of, we can't guarantee anything, but, to kind of reiterate some of the sentiment already, it's on all of us to still teach and still provide opportunities and that kind of thing. And another comment I want to make is in terms of the KHSAA guidelines, I'm a little confused in terms of the 6-hour thing. My understanding was that they were doing the 6-hour thing because they were going to be contact sports. And, you know, for example, golf is still starting at August the 2nd, I think, as normal. So this delay with KHSAA and the 6-hour thing, my understanding was that was mainly for the contact sports with football.
That could be, Curtis. I'm glad you helped me see deeper into that. I do intend to find out more, and I will compare with golf, because golf, they really are treating golf differently.
Jason, did you have something you want to say, Jason Bowles?
I was just curious on, you know, like to Michael, for example, how they were even going to prepare a non-competitive group with the numbers restriction.
You know, I'm still trying to figure it out. I haven't put a dot of drill on paper yet. Of course, my kids are still re-signing up for band. And, you know, honestly, the numbers are getting better now that we're not competing. I've had a lot of kids that were not doing it this year because their parents were afraid of travel, that are letting their kids do it because we're staying at home. But I'm just going to do, typically anyway we do it, but I'm going to really hone in on it this year and just keep the woodwinds and brass on different sides of the field. And maybe we'll have a set at the end of the show where they can finally create one form together. But that way, you know, I can at least rehearse in my pods and not have to worry about, oh, well, we have to fix this curvilinear set that you don't have half of the people here to guide to. So that's how I'm going to do it. And it's probably going to sound god awful the first time we get together, you know, just balance wise, but that's the way I'm going to try to do it. I have no idea. Never done it before. So let's see what happens.
Anybody else?
Kind of back to the 6-hour thing from KHSAA. I know there's more to it, and it may be contact sports and things like that. The reality is, I've spoken with a few band directors, just kind of folks I know asking, has your admin said anything to you about this? And they've already heard back from their administrators, and the administrators said, you're going to follow that too, which has effectively ended their band camp. You know, you've gone from 40 or 50 hours a week to 6 hours a week. So that's something it would be great to have more information on. That might be a band director might be able to go and talk to their administrator. But there are several right now whose administrators have already told them, well, if the football team or certain sports can only do 6 hours, then band, you're going to have to follow that too. And I think the concern came out of just time of exposure. So there's a whole lot of band directors sitting at home today and students waiting to hear, do we have band camp on Monday, or are we at 6 hours this week? Band director I spoke to last night said he contacted the principal and she said, yeah, you're at 6 hours as well. So he's had to redo his entire, and he was starting band camp on Monday. So he's gone down to 2 hours on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. That's his 6 hours. And he is dividing his, you know, kids up into groups, and they'll be there different times, but it's effectively ended his band camp, which is the time when we learn the show and, you know, and put that time into being, you know, for music and marching fundamentals, learning the show, putting the dots on the field. But we're, you know, everybody's behind on that just because of the unknown. If you know, you're looking at continuing with competitions, then you're going to have to push the start date back. You're going to have to shorten the season, and you're going to have to lower the time limits even still. I think that's the only viable things to do, considering that there are going to be a lot of band directors who are going to be limited to that 6 hours a week until August, and then school starting up. My wife asked me, well, can some of those schools just move their band camp date? Well, sure you can, but this late of notice, how do you know that parents can make their changes in schedules and students can make their changes in schedules? You know, we know those things. You just can't move your band camp dates to all of a sudden, okay, band camp's going to be August 3rd instead. We're still planning on starting August 12th in Oldham County, and I know some have pushed back a little further than that. If there is going to be any kind of chance at competitions in any way, you really have to look at pushing that date back. But Corey, you're right. Marching band can continue without competition. Competition doesn't define how good of a teacher we are. Michael, as you put it, good teaching is good teaching, and a good organization pulls things together. There's things that can be learned and taught, and good experiences that can still happen.
Thank you, David. Anybody else before we move on?
Yeah, may I go back and add to my statement earlier then? I mean, I agree with you 100%. And I think that the life lessons that kids get out of marching band are so valuable, because I think they get more life lessons than they do anything personally. At least that's what I always strive for. But I think that no matter what we do with this, if we say that competition season, like Beth says, we're not going to have state or what, if we say that, then I think we need to very carefully look at how we state that. And I'm just saying this is a big if. Everything's a big if right now. But very carefully how we state that, because of administration and how certain administrations feel about programs. Now, I think most of you guys are very lucky that your administrations support your band programs, but that's not the case across all administrations. So I think that's a biggie right there, is that we don't let them think that we're just throwing in the towel and it's not worth it, but that we still try to get administrators to support the band programs and continue with them, because so many band directors right now are already being told that they're not going to be having band class. They, a lot of the extended pays have been cut. Some band directors have been cut, and some of the directors are being told, because of class size, you're going to be monitoring history class or blah blah class. So that's my major concern with all this. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Pauletta.
I'm going to jump off of what Pauletta said a little bit here for a second. I think that as a committee, it's our primary responsibility to come up with the how to do so safely and advocate. I mean, we've talked about that word multiple times in our meetings over the last 4 months. But I think it's our job to put our heads together to come up with a safe solution. And then I feel like it's the job of the band directors and the programs to figure out if that's what they're going to do or not. And I think if we come up with the how that we've been talking about, some of these concerns, they might be answered and some new concerns come up, but I think that would be a game changer. And I think the more information that we can get approved, John was talking about the process for the first proposal that we put through, the more that we can get approved as safe, the more questions that are answered. And I think the unanswered questions are a huge part of concern right now.
Thank you, Jenny.
In total fairness to my district, I feel like I've got to say this. I mean, Tim went ahead and talked to the superintendent and the principal yesterday, and it was his decision for us to go non-competitive. But the superintendent and the principal were very grateful. But not everybody's administrations feel that way. We had Mayfield, the director there. Yes, I can admit people to the Google. My battery died. I have to plug it in. Tell your people I'll get the Google Meet back on in just a second. Okay, my battery died. So at Mayfield, Darren went and talked to his principal, and the principal said, I agree with you. We do not need to go to competitive. I agree that that's the best thing for our students, but I'm not going to make the decision. You're not going to make the decision. We're not going to take the heat. It's either going to be the superintendent or it's going to be KMEA. And so we've got that kind of thing happening down here. I've got an administrator in my building that's a former band director that has said that he thinks it's irresponsible of KMEA to even try and hold it. He thinks it's going to blow back on KMEA and give KMEA a bad feeling with the administration. if something actually does happen and it spreads and there's a connection to KMEA events. So, I mean, that's just an opposite point of view. Jenny, I understand what you're saying about that we need to talk about it and try and find a way to make it happen. But I also think that overall, it's our decision to do what's best for our kids and our band programs. And if we're letting our band programs individually flounder because of financial reasons or because of advocacy reasons, because we don't make the group decision, then we've done a disservice to our individual band programs. And then I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm really going to try and shut up on this. And I know I talk too much. Tim tells me all the time, and John will admit it too. Okay, so because we were married for 13 years, as I tell people. And so there's also the social emotional part of this. I mean, every virtual conference I've been to, every professional development I've gone to says this year, what we've got to focus on with our students is not just the instruction of our students. Number one, we've got to take care of them socially and emotionally. And I don't know how many of you know someone or it happened to your program that last year with WGI, indoor drumline, indoor winds, you came up to the very end of the season and boom, it disappeared. And the negative impact that that had on your kids. Can you imagine what would happen if you were pushing towards this and all of a sudden it's canceled after you've invested all this time? That is going to be a huge negative socially and emotionally for our kids. So I think that's something else we've got to take care of. And now I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn the Google Meet back on. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Beth. Anything else from anybody?
I kind of wanted to piggyback on that just for a second because there's two parts of that I've been dealing with. The one, I asked, I'm getting obviously good relationship with over the last few years with our athletic coaches and the football coach. And once the guidelines, I actually didn't know that I didn't see them. I wanted to ask him what was going on. And one of the things I asked him is, how are your athletes taking that? And, he's talked about how, this conditioning and doing it for more weeks kind of getting old on the kids, so there is that idea of the mental fatigue of like, when do we get to go back to normal kind of thing. I think that the athletes are feeling some of that. But I guess the bigger one is like what you were saying about, I've heard a lot of that, like obviously from we're in a similar boat with this, like of the whole KMEA needs to do something. And I keep telling everybody like, well, we are KMEA, so are you. Like, who is this KMEA group that we're not aware of? Like, we're all in this together. So, like, we're trying to help each other out with this. And the same thing for the band guidelines and everything else. Like, it's all created with us. So if there are folks that are looking from our guidance on this, it's more of we're trying to do this together. So we're all trying to figure out, obviously, collectively what's best for all of us, not just what's best for KMEA or blowback on KMEA. It's because we are KMEA. We're all together in this.
Thank you, Joe.
For me, the Kentucky Department of Education is not mandating this is how every school in the state's going to go back and resume school, because there's not a one-size-fits-all, because there's so much diversity in our districts and such a different approach that needs to be had at the local level. And so, I've got people in my district too that says, hey, KMEA needs to make a decision and take this off our backs. But I don't know if there is ever going to be a solution that we can come up with as a committee that's going to cover everybody's situation. And I think it's going to have to really come down to the local level. I've been hired to make the best decisions for my group. And if I think the best decision is for my group not to go competitive, then I need to be big enough to stand in front of my kids and tell them that and present that. I've already told my kids we're not going forward. that we are going forward, but that I've told them up front, there's no guarantee that we're going to be able to compete at all. My plan in terms of these rehearsals that we potentially are going to have or not have in the next weeks and months or whatever is going to be, like some of you talked about, just to get the kids playing again and trying to just teach. And, you know, we haven't ordered the first thing. We haven't taught, you know, the first note of music's not even been written. I'm more worried about getting my kids and taking care of that social and emotional needs. How are you doing? And trying to get back into doing something. What I'm finding out is, you know, the kids have had 4 months away from this, and there's been a void created, and some of those kids are filling that void with other things. And I want to be able to provide some sort of opportunity, whether it's just we're meeting and we're working towards a show or not, to be able to fill that need, to give them something to do, to work towards. But, you know, in terms of making these decisions at the local level, I think that's part of our jobs. I think that's what we were hired to do. You know, that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback off Joe, but I'll speak up after Curtis. Everybody's saying that, you know, the uniform thing is optional. Competing is optional also. And KMEA's job, which I've heard tons of people giving KMEA flack this past year for not giving full opportunities to the students across Kentucky. And we're supposed to give them this opportunity if we are capable. And it's a cop out to ask KMEA to make a hard decision for us when the governor's had to make some hard decisions. And I think that as long as we are able to do something, we try to give it to them. Now, a lot of people on the committee, maybe myself, may not go competitive, but I still think it's our job to try.
Thank you, Patrick. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Patrick, doesn't the governor make the hard decisions so the local people don't have to?
David Graham? Oh, did you have something to say, David?
I do. I'm going to let Patrick answer if he wants to.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Well, I did, but he has opened up these things to allow us to proceed. So why not proceed as much as we can?
I think a lot of things. I think the most powerful thing we've heard this morning was Tim's talking about giving kids the opportunity to perform and how so many of them haven't had that and may not have that for a long time. And I've been really excited in the last 2 weeks, the directors I've talked to and the folks I've heard this morning talking about, we might not be able to do what we've been used to doing, but we're going to do something and making it work for your own program. I think what this committee and eventually KMEA is going to have to decide is, can we accept what would some kind of championship look like? And this task force, I think we've heard a lot of good ideas about fleshing out those logistics. What would that look like? Can we live with that? And can we live with it if that means a third to a half of the people that normally participate in our championships can do it? Is that worthwhile? And I don't have an answer to that, but I think those are the questions we really have to drill down on. I think everybody here, and I think most all of our folks, whether they compete or not, are going to provide something outdoors. Well, as Joe said, it's going to have to be outdoors for the first little while. for our kids in the marching band activity. You know, the guys I've talked to who've in the last week, especially in our area, have been very realistic about we're going to have a band, but we're not spending nearly as much on staff. We're not spending nearly as much on production because we know the plug might get pulled. We know our football crowd might be the only ones to get to see it, or maybe our parents are the only ones to see it. But I think Beth's right, and I think Patrick's right. As KMEA, we do have kind of a parental role to, it is our organization. And if we provide the opportunity for a state championships, then we have to do it in a responsible way and in a way that's not going to endanger students and parents and families. And that's a huge responsibility. But at the same time, if we can do it, if there's a way to make it happen, even if it's very, very different, then I think we do have to forge ahead and make sure, I think we have to find an answer to that. And we may get in a week or 2 weeks, we may get to a point where we say, no, we just can't do it. But we have to know that we can't do it before we pull the plug. But I do think it's imperative that we have an answer for folks soon. I really do. I think people need to know that yes, we think the opportunity is here, barring the unforeseen, and here's what it's going to look like, or no, we just can't. And we don't need to make that decision today, but I think we do need to have it soon. And I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you, David.
What do you guys and gals think about taking all the competitive aspect out of it altogether? So you can still have KMEA sponsored festivals or whatever you want to call them. But I think a lot of the things that people are looking at is we have all these restrictions. We have money problems. The people are looking for K to make a call are also they're looking at it from that lens of we have all these uncertainties. We're going to soak all this money into it. Well, if you're, because if that's the case, if we have that, we put all the requirements for whatever, what's to stop, if October things are better and we're allowed to host an event somewhere, then you can bring your football band and perform and we give a performance opportunity, but we don't have the competitive pressure is significant when you start saying competing against other groups, because we always feel that obviously, and there's always slight disadvantages or advantages based on a lot of different factors. But right now, competitive side of it seems almost impossible to me to even think about competing against another group in any way, shape, or form when I don't even have an idea of going into when I can have my band rehearse together at all. It could be October before they let that happen. Is there anybody that thinks that's, I guess like a lot of folks are saying, the idea of going competitive at this point seems impossible. But, having performance opportunities are things of meaning for my kids. Obviously we all want to have that because they need it. So just, I don't know, something I thought I'd throw out there.
So I guess my question to that is does that fall under the realm of what this committee is for? When this marching band used to be called Marching Band Board of Control when it first started in 1986, and the sole purpose of this committee that we call it now was to come up with rules for sanctioned contests and to have a state championship. The state championship part of it came about the second year, I think. No, it was that first year. It was that first year. And so all of our rules and guidelines that we follow were based around the idea of competition. So I guess my question is does that option of going competitive, does that really fall under our wheelhouse? And I guess I would ask that to the committee. Maybe John, you can get us started on that. I see this as our challenge, our work to do is toward competitive marching band. And if it's not, then we don't deal with it. This group probably does not deal with that. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I'm asking the question.
I'll provide my thought on that. I think absolutely we do, because we also have to think about the future of competitive marching band beyond this year and beyond the pandemic. like somebody was saying earlier, if we bankrupt a bunch of band programs trying to put on a competitive season, I think that hurts us in the long run. My thought.
Thanks, Corey.
Well, and Curtis mentioned, and I agree with him, we're all hired to make the best decisions for our bands. But I think a lot of people are going to feel the pressure that if there is a competitive circuit, well, we have to be a part of it, because if not, not only are they going to lose face, but I think in a lot of places, folks will riot if the band doesn't compete, if there's a competitive circuit.
I know, like at Eastern, I mean, when we announced that we were non-competitive, we had some parents and students voice their opinion, and with that sentiment, I know that if there's a competitive season, I'm sure we'll hear more later on about it. So I think it is putting a lot of pressure on the directors. And I noticed in that survey a lot were asking for that decision to be taken off their shoulders.
In a situation like this, I think it kind of changes this committee's purpose slightly. And my thought on what we have to do as a committee right now is decide on the viability of this season. And if we deem it as viable, then we come up with those parameters in order to make it happen. But it's a unique situation, so I think we have a unique role right now.
Tim, we currently already have the option to bring our band to competition and compete in festival class if we don't want to compete. So, that's something that this body, has come up with in the past. And so I kind of feel like in some ways that qualifies us to be talking about the limiting the competitive aspect if that's how everybody wants to go.
Thanks, Curtis. So, Joe, do you want to follow up on that anymore?
Well, I mean, just kind of to add to what you were saying about as far as governance, I mean, we already have, because I would say that any of this stuff would need guidelines. We still have those, things, recommendations and so forth to follow. I mean, of course, Ohio has a state championship event that is non-competitive. It's ratings based. So, there's a way to, just like our festival, concert assessments, we could create ratings if we wanted to and give guidelines, for the sheets, for the feedback to the judges. There's still plenty of decisions that could be made. And I guess, like I said, just looking at it from the big picture I wonder how all this feels about, so I think that in October, if things are improved, there might be a good chance of myself and Austin and some of the local band directors saying, hey, let's go to Ryle and perform for each other and have an event. But the idea of state championships with 30 bands standing shoulder to shoulder on the field and, bands from all over the state coming to things, it just seems almost a pipe dream at this point that's going to be anything like that. So I'm just trying to think of what's an opportunity or a venue or an option that we could look that would give us the flexibility to do what we can when we can.
Curtis, did you have something to say? I saw your phone on.
I'm sorry. No.
Okay. Austin, I haven't heard you pipe in too much today. You got some thoughts?
I polled my district. I feel like this meeting has had a lot of great discussion and it's opened up a lot of great points of view. Things that I haven't considered. My district right now, I had 11 responses. I just went out and said, if there was a vote to cancel the season or move forward, how would you vote? And my district right now, the opinions might be changing after watching this chat here. But right now, the majority of my district by one vote is to move forward and try to have a season. It's really tough. I'm in the mindset, and my school district is really small. I have a superintendent who's really supportive of everything we're trying to do. There are still some unanswered questions regarding transportation and contests. But his mindset is, if we're able to have football on our campus, we should be able to safely have a band contest with restrictions. And I think that if there are programs around the state that want to have a competitive band, taking that away from them may not be fair. But at the same time, I also understand where everybody's coming from on the other side of it, saying that, it may be a great idea for KMEA to help make that decision so they can take it back to their administrators and say, KMEA as a whole has decided to do this, take some pressure off them. I'm conflicted. I don't think there's anybody on this board who isn't conflicted. Some, I would think, because we all care about this activity, and, we wouldn't put as much time and effort into it if we didn't care about it. And it's not black and white. So, I'm in a different situation than a lot of people are because we're a small school district and we have a really supportive superintendent. But I also see, the other programs out there that are either in big school districts where, you have one band in a school district with 7 or 8 high schools or 20 high schools if you're talking about Louisville, and the superintendent isn't thinking about one program. So, yeah, it's all tough. It's all tough. But, I think I'm still in the mindset that if we can make something happen, if we can try to push forward until the governor or KHSAA or somebody, with a little bit more clout says that we cannot do it, I think we should keep pushing forward. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Austin. And I think, and we need to move ahead in the agenda just to touch on some of these possible options and ideas. I do want to get through this, but I think the overarching question for everybody, for constituents, is: are we willing to wait long enough to get some answers? David Graham alluded to that as well. Are we willing to wait as quickly as we can to find out some of the answers to these questions? And if we can do that, then maybe we can either move forward or stop. So, speaking
Tim,
of
would you call on Tim? I'm sorry. Would you call on George, please?
Yes, George, would you like to speak?
Yeah, you know what? Since I do want us to push through the agenda, so I'll wait and make my comments at the end. But thank you. If I can hold off till the end.
All right, that'll be fine. Thank you. I don't really know that we need to discuss the next item on the list. It's under C, and it says, if football moves to spring, can marching band continue in the fall? And can and should marching band be held in the spring? Just based on our conversation today, I think we can hold off on discussion in that area until that becomes necessary. So if nobody has any objections to that, we'll move on. Hearing none, move on. So the rest of the agenda is based on possible options. And under D, and this is out there, Dr. Strobey shared this with me. Gosh, it's probably been 2 or 3 weeks ago that John shared this with me as a possibility. And that's the idea of, let's suppose if spectators were not allowed and transportation were a problem. The idea of having a video stream performance. Bands would record themselves at their own stadium at a prescribed time, just as if it were a contest time, now appearing at 12 o'clock. And they would perform at their own stadium. The judges, there would be no spectators. There would be nobody in the judges' box. Judges would see the live stream performance from their homes, and the audience would see it from their homes if they wanted to. The possibility of having like a pay-per-view if audiences want to pay to watch each band perform. And of course, there are issues with any of these options and scenarios that we talk about. Obviously, if you have, if you're videotaping your band at your stadium, it might be a different viewpoint, a different perspective. You may have a high stadium, you may have a low stadium. The quality of your recording may not be as good as another band. And then, as John mentioned, I think in one of our email correspondence, that there is the issue of copyright, performing without copyright. So just want to if anybody wants to have input on this, I welcome that.
Quick, just a little bit to add to that. I don't really actually think they would be recording themselves. They would be video streaming themselves, because the recording situation does get into copyright issues far more than streaming. Streaming doesn't require a great deal of licensing, and it's probably much more affordable and much more possible. And I will say, this is such a different thing. It can become a rabbit hole real quick, and there's no way we would solve all the problems about equity or trying to even approach equity with this right now. So I would respectfully suggest that comments be that either to the effect that it's a great idea if we can't do state, or it's a bad idea. And even if we can't do state, don't even think about this stupid idea. You know, probably go one way or the other, and then the details to be worked out later.
Okay, thanks, John. Any quick comments on this option? All right, no comment then. All right.
Just say that it might seem problematic since we can't even live stream this meeting.
Good point. Good point. Another option, and this is out there as well. You know, we've been talking about if we can't have the last 2 weeks of the season. You know, what if we can't have quarterfinals and semifinals and finals? But what if that's the only thing we do have? That's what this option 2 is about. I know it's far-fetched and out there as well, but you know, let's suppose things are bad for a while, and you know we're limited in what we can do, but things get better, say September, and we don't have anything going on during the regular season, and we are able to have something the last 2 weeks of the year. In other words, no regular season contest, with the hopes that things might get better in October. So this may again be another one of those really quick responses, but I just wanted to throw that out there. This was an idea that was thrown at me, and I thought I would share it. Comments? Okay. Either you want to get through this meeting, or you really think it's a dumb idea, or both. So we'll move ahead. All right, under E, if SMBC is allowed to happen, I'm talking about the last 2 weeks, okay? Obviously, there are some concerns that go along with that if we're able to have the last 2 weeks of the season. John has added to this on the agenda the availability of regional, semifinal, and final venues. We may not know if sites are available. Another big issue is bands that would have to travel. A lot of times, typically, there are many bands that for the second week stay in hotels, especially bands from, and this year it's in Lexington, or hopefully we'll be in Lexington. Bands from the western part of the state, it's a long travel, and so that typically they would spend the night. That may not be available. It may be that hotels simply say you cannot, we can't accommodate you. So that's problematic for sure. And if, let's suppose a West band has they draw an early semifinal time. Suppose they're supposed to perform that second weekend at 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, they may have to leave at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. If they can't stay at a hotel, they're going to be traveling all night long in the dark, only to get to just there in time to do their performance, and be pretty worn out and probably be not at their best at that time. So those are problematic. I showed possible solutions, and there are a couple of these solutions that probably won't work, but one of them is assuming that West bands could make the trip over, the possibility of eliminating the draw for semifinals. In other words, the band performance times would be based on their travel distance. So bands that have the longest travel distance, supposedly in the West, would be placed later in the performance order. What it does not fix, obviously, is the lengthy amount of time on a bus that a band would have to make either way. It's a long distance, it's a long time on a bus. So those are some concerns that we have there in terms of and possible solutions to if SMBC is allowed to happen on the last 2 weeks. So I see, Patrick, you're typing something. I'd rather you speak because I don't read very well. Patrick, do you have a response or a comment? Guess not. He prefers.
Yeah, it says, he says that BOA is considering having a one-run semifinal and start later to accommodate travel.
No awards, no nothing. They perform, they walk off the field, they're done.
Right. Well, this is more about, this is about the possibility of eliminating the draw. Comments? Any other comments about this?
Would people be willing to go along with that just so that it could happen? I mean, those people that represent districts closer to the regional areas, you know, those sites. Do you think the people in your districts that are competing would be okay with that so that it would happen?
It's a legitimate question. Any other thoughts?
Based on my experience from other controversial things that have come along over the years, you generally get a pretty good split in the vote. The people that that a change presumes to advantage are for it, and the people for whom a change presumes to disadvantage are against it. So the distant bands might say in August, yes, please, let's eliminate the draw because I don't want to take the chance I'd be first. And the close bands would go, I don't care when I go during the day, I vote against it. That I can see a split vote coming down on something like that. That's just a prediction, certainly not a reality.
Okay. Okay, again, this is not something that we have to make a decision on right now. These are just items of discussion and to get our thought process going.
I've got a quick question though along these lines. Do we have enough regional sites so that no one has to share a site? So maybe instead of starting so early in the morning because one of the sites has to accommodate 2 classes, is there a way we can start late enough that it's not going to make that big a difference if somebody has to travel all the way from Paducah to a regional site?
In the West this year, as I recall, we had 3 sites apply, and we accepted those 3. Now, sometimes that's because other possible sites that might compete for it kind of know the lay of the land. They know they're not as geographically advantageous and they don't have a turf field, so they don't bother to apply because they already know that they're not going to get chosen. So what you'd have to do is go back to April almost and seek applications or perhaps recruit schools to host those extra sites. And we would need 2 additional sites in the East and 2 additional sites in the West if we were to follow that, Beth.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay. Letter F is another option, and this has to do with the idea of what might happen if we cannot have the use of UK Stadium. You know, for whatever reason, even if they have football, they may at some time, and they may have already planned to say, look, we're just going to keep this for our stadium for UK football games, and no other events will be held here. We don't know that, but this is just a scenario of what if week 2 or if UK is not available. And so this is an idea it's out there and it's different, but it's possibly worth considering. And that's the idea of canceling week 2. And our season ends at quarterfinals. So, for example, and Beth, you mentioned the idea of is it possible to have 2 possible regional sites to accommodate even so groups would not have as far to travel even within their region. But you could have as a final end game for the season, it ends at quarterfinals. It's not a state championship, it's quarterfinals, and you would vie for the 2A East regional championship and have placements. You could even have 1st through 6th place if you wanted to. But what this does is it solves the travel issues so that bands do not have to travel and as far, and it gives at least something for the band to work toward in terms of a final event. This might not be a viable option if UK does not work out, but it does eliminate a state championship. But it does at least allow for an end game, and I think that's important. Comments?
What if this were not just an option only if UK is not available? What if this were an option on its own to look at a way to reduce travel costs, reduce travel time, I should say, sorry, keep a competitive season available, and knowing that, in order to assist districts and schools with travel so they're not going as far, our end of season is going to be a regional championship. What if that were an option on its own rather than an option only if UK is not available? Does that make sense?
I think that's what Florida is doing. So that's what I've heard. I think they have like 4 regional championships and they don't have like a final state championship. That's what I've heard.
Yeah, that's what I've heard too.
It also provides for limited exposure.
Okay, did I hear somebody else trying to pipe in?
I was just saying that also shows a concession for limiting exposure, which really is the biggest deal right now, is time of exposure, limiting exposure. So it would show that KMEA was looking at options for our administrators around the state and band directors around the state. We're looking at options that would limit exposure, and that's one way.
Thanks, David.
I think that is the best way to make a concession. I think that's a pretty good medium. It does still give some sort of championship, but without everything of trying to figure out how to do state.
And another point on this, sorry to jump in there, Michael. Another point is a lot of bands, some of their decisions to not compete are not the band director per se. Maybe it's the superintendent or someone has made that decision for them. So this may be a year to look at not having a statewide championship because of that, because not everyone is able to compete. Just something to think about as well.
Weekend 1 doesn't have anything for 5A. Just throwing that out there, that there is. And the only way you would be able to do that, I don't think there'd be a way to do an East and West regional without bands having to travel pretty far on that one, just because of where they're located geographically. But just something to consider with that.
Yeah, I had forgotten about that. You're right.
Joe, I missed the first part of that. So you're saying there would not be enough bands in the 5A regionals to have it? I misheard you, or I didn't hear the first part of that. Say it again, please.
Well, I mean, last year we had 11 5A groups. I don't know if that would change. I would say it wouldn't get marginally bigger or smaller, just because of the way the formula works. I mean, there might be a few bands that decide not to do BOA and do KMEA, or bands that decide not to compete, or vice versa. But you've got bands all the way over. Like if you had most of the 5A bands that competed last year were on the east or central part of the state. But if you had a 5A regional in the middle of the state, then you'd still have bands, like Davies County and so forth, that are having to travel a pretty long way just to get to it.
Well, just to be clear, we're not talking about a total regional championship. We're talking about, or a total, I guess it would be regional championship, but we're talking about East and West. So I'm just thinking out loud here. So you said that most of the 5A bands were in East. So you'd have a considerable number of East 5A bands that would compete, say, in Lexington or somewhere in that area. And then how many 5A West bands are there?
I think last year there were 3 or 4.
So you may have as little as 4 in the West. And my question is that still a problem? Is that a problem to have just 4 bands in the West and 11 or 6 bands, 7 bands in the East? I'm just asking.
It would depend on where you would have them go.
Well, I'm thinking in terms of just the idea of vying for a regional championship. Is that worthwhile for the number 4 5A West bands to want to compete, to want to go to that?
I think, once again, it depends on where you would have them go. If you're going to have them go to Lexington, to Tate's Creek Stadium, or it really depends on where you're going to have them go.
No, Beth, we're misunderstanding here. If there is a 5A, if the season ends with a regional quarterfinal, that means that 4 5A West bands would not travel to Lexington. They would pick a place in Western Kentucky to have their regional, and that would be the end of their season.
So what you're saying is that you would find a place where 4 bands could compete for a regional champion.
That is correct.
You would make a 5A regional. Okay.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, if that possibility were there, I think we might find more 5A bands willing to do it in the Western half.
Is that worth the cost? That few number of bands?
I'm wondering if we already have regional set up in that area, if it's such few bands. Based on timeline, I'm wondering if it would be possible to just tack those 4 5A bands at the end of another regional, or on the other side, instead of trying to come up with a brand new location, depending on whichever class has the least amount of bands already, just tack those 5As on the end, clear the stadium, sanitize in between.
Good point.
I guess before we need to, I think, Tim, excuse me, before we would know that, Jenny, it's not a bad idea. We'd have to know how many bands we have coming, would enroll at, let's say, I think GRC is our site for, I can't remember now, 2A and 3A East, for example. And if we had relatively few and we could make that work over the course of the day and still have 2 or 3 hours or something toward the end to put the 5As in, or at the beginning or sometime, then we might not need an additional site. So it depends on the enrollment, but which we don't know for those other 2 classes.
I think one of the bigger issues with those is kind of the same thing we're running into with the contest host. Even is, I guess it's worth, I don't think it's necessarily better to look at, but we're still putting an awful big risk on whether those sites will be able to host those kind of groups in that event, and they could probably cancel on us, the week of. So we definitely are going to have some, I can't imagine that in October at some point, we're not going to be running into some issues with that somewhere along the line.
Thanks, Joe. All right. Anything else in this area right here?
Along those same lines, how would we know what class we're in? Yeah, we had 117 last year, but we're probably going to be 40 down from that. So that's going to mess up the classes too.
Yeah. John, that's your cup of tea right there, my friend.
We have a formula. And it took me last year, I think, pretty much the better part of a day to make sure I had that all right based on, school size and band size and giving people the points and then dividing it up. Yeah, that really is a variable. The fact that for various reasons, bands in most cases probably will be smaller. I think there's just a lot of parents, I keep coming up with the expression creeped out. There's a lot of people creeped out by the idea of their fears about getting together and traveling together. So we don't know, and classes would shift around, and the boundaries of each class, except for 1A, probably would go down. And the upper boundary of 1A might go down, because if you only have, let's say, 75 bands that do this, and I think that's taking all of your yeses and all of your maybes, some of which just turn to no, but let's say 70 bands, and you divide that 5 ways, you've got in every class, you've got, I'm not that quick with math, 20 something bands. Oh no, not 20, less than 20. 15 or something.
14.
So in the whole, okay, 14 in the whole class, and that's 7 per region typically. Yeah, it would be a big surprise what class everybody was in.
Would we have fewer classes so there could be more people in regionals?
Boy, there's a can of worms.
You're bad, Beth.
Yeah.
Only if this committee really, really, really wanted it.
Okay. Unless there's any other discussion in this area, I'm going to move on. And good points. Good points. In fact, I was a little bit surprised at how more of you were receptive to this as a possibility. But moving on, G, and we're coming down the home stretch here, sort of. Option for regular season contest to ease contest host money concerns. Now, I ran this by Dr. Strobe before putting this into the agenda because I know that involves the use of KMEA funds, and I didn't want for him to be caught unaware before the meeting started. So I asked him about putting this in the agenda, and he was open to it. But the idea of using KMEA emergency funds, contingency funds to pay for judges. This could be worked in many ways in terms of how it's set up, but even the possibility of reducing the number of judges to 4 at contest. I put parenthetically there the possibility of 1 music judge, 1 visual, 1 music effect, 1 visual effect. That can be talked about as well and toyed with. Eliminate field, percussion, and guard judges. And then the idea of if this were to happen, KMEA might solicit bands or contest hosts, knowing that their judges would be paid for. So I think probably we probably need to ask Dr. Strobe. He said he's put some numbers to it, I believe. Is that right, John?
A little bit. I think from what I can gather, typically the average expenses for the judge beyond the stipend is probably about $75 a judge, something like that. And then, of course, what do we pay? We're paying judges, I can't remember right now. What's our pay? 200?
200.
Yeah. So that's $275 per judge. Let's say 300 because it's a round figure. So if you had 4 judges, that would be total cost for the judges would be $1,200. If nobody spent the night, that would add some to it. So, and then if you had 6 judges, that'd be $1,800 per contest. and that would be KMEA's contingency fund or emergency fund. And it's beyond, it's outside, it's above my pay grade to determine whether this something like this qualifies as an emergency or whether it would be something that's an elective use of such funds. The thing, of course, the purpose those funds were put back was if something really bad happened. Well, it has. And so now, of course, we're going to have to expend some of those funds. And as long as the pandemic is affecting things, it's going to be difficult for KMEA to bring in the revenue equal to its necessary expenses without really cutting services to our members. So that can go on for a few years. It really could, but something else could go wrong too. That's always the next thing. What if because of the pandemic, somebody does decide to name KMEA in some kind of a large lawsuit? We have insurance for that, but you know that you still, if you've ever totaled your car, you know that insurance doesn't really cover everything. So it's a chance you take by taking that money, much of which came from the State Marching Band Championship in the past. Very well understood, but it's put us in the position to be able to make those kinds of decisions. I hope that answers the question in not too vague of a way.
Yes, thank you, John. So with that in mind, this the idea of having judges paid for at a contest and the possibility of reducing the number of judges. Comments?
I think that would help a lot of people out. It'd probably encourage more people to keep their contest to go if they're able to.
Yeah, that's our single biggest piece of overhead is paying our judges. Because I think we pay $500 per judge, and it works out to be about $4,000. I think we have about $10,000 of overhead. That's almost half. It's just our judges.
Not sure we get to let the contest host set the price on the judge, set the stipend on the judges just because KMEA is paying for it, right? But you know, it would be probably equitable to put somebody. It would certainly cut your cost.
Any feelings from anybody else? Thoughts?
I think this would be a great idea, and as I already mentioned, that's there for an emergency. And if this isn't an emergency, I don't know what is.
How do we feel about cutting the number of judges down versus keeping 6?
I like the idea of cutting the judges down. Certainly, I think to reduce risk and all that, you eliminate the on-field stuff. I still think, you know, giving contest hosts, taking care of the judges' expense is certainly would help. But, you know, for the people that would still be participating, if you eliminated the effect captions, for example, I think that helps people feel like they're more on an even playing field.
Oh, it's wonderful. It just shows your.
Thank you.
Well, this proposal retains the effect judges, ironically enough.
Curtis, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, doing the math really quick, if there's 50 contests and you're doing 300 a judge and you've got 6 people in the press box that you're covering that expense for, you know, that's around 90,000, I think. I think if you only have 4 judges in the box, you're looking at 60,000 to cover those costs. You know, it would help. It would certainly help, you know, ease the cost for those that are wanting to host a contest. It gives them a little bit of insurance in terms of not being out that money. So I still think that this this particular part is tied in with the people that would be participating's financial part too. That if there's less people in the press box judging the production value of what they're seeing, then the focus is really on the skill aspect of things and the teaching and training there, as opposed to who's been able to spend the most money on certain aspects of a production. I think these two things are kind of tied together there. So, as the proposal's made to, do we use contingency funds to pay for 6 judges versus 4? I really think that eliminating the effect captions would go a long way to giving a lot of people some relief of going, maybe we can still do this without having to pour a lot of money into that aspect of it.
Okay, so
I'm sorry, somebody's even suggested that we could even go back to the old sheets and do 3 music judges and 2 visual judges. There would be 5 judges in that case.
right, and then take the top 3 scores and average them, or throw out the top and the bottom and then average the middle 3 the old way.
Well, I was kind of thinking that you would factor in the field commander score too.
Of course, and the parade too. There was a time when parade score was counted in there as well for the sweepstakes award. Never did win that. Our parade band was awful. Anyway,
and don't forget inspection.
That's right, inspection. Boy, are we showing our age. So the way I listed it in the agenda was 4 judges with 1 music, 1 visual, 1 music effect, and 1 visual effect. Curtis has suggested, Curtis, you said your suggestion is to eliminate any kind of effect judge, or are you still offering the option of bands to pick and choose a lane where they can go just for music and visual comments, and other groups can go for the full complement of effect?
I'm for whatever is going to give. I'm for giving people options, and if having different quote unquote circuits would be the kind of direction to go to ease some of those concerns, those financial concerns, then I would be for that. If it's to just eliminate that, the effect captions, if the focus is just on the music and the visual for this year only, if that's the route to go, that would make people feel more comfortable. But I am for just giving people opportunity, just whatever is going to make people feel the most comfortable. I could get behind either way, or both.
So let's just think. What I'd like to hear opinions on is just simply 4 judges, regardless of what caption they're on. 4 judges versus 6. Any thoughts? Curtis has given his.
I'm fine with 4. I'm not crazy about getting rid of effect. I understand the whole aspect of changing your show this year. But I think eliminating the field judges would probably be, to me, makes more sense.
Okay. Anybody else?
I agree with that. I think it'd be kind of a disservice to, into what we put a lot of money into, because I think a lot of the money and time goes into designing the effect of the show and making it effective. And so if we got rid of those captions,
Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, jump in there.
Oh, I was going to say, and it's not just props and uniforms. Effect is, the pacing of the show. That's why we pay our arrangers what we do, or seek out arrangements that we seek out for the effect of the arrangement. That's a big part of it.
Same goes for our color guard. we take out effect, we essentially take out the color guard.
Okay, so I'm hearing the idea of an option of 4 judges rather than 6 as kind of an agreement here.
Okay, now, so I've got a question. Can,
You weren't going to talk anymore, Beth.
it's a question. It's not an opinion. It's a question. Okay, so can the contest host, if KMEA is going to pay for the 4 judges, can the contest host choose to pay for a guard judge or a percussion judge?
I think that's totally optional. I think that's fine. Right now, it's optional that we offer peripheral unit awards and our judge. So I think that's totally up to the contest host.
I also think limited it to 4 is going to make your press box a lot easier, because something tells me we're going to have issues with how many people we can stuff into one of those too.
Good point, Joe. Good point. Okay, so I think that's certainly worthy of further delving into as we move forward, or as we hopefully move forward. Under other discussion, under 7, the one item just possibly that we have actually talked about this before. I don't know if we didn't get a definitive answer. The idea of limiting the number of sanctioned contests required to qualify for SMBC. Is there a thought process about just eliminating that altogether, or still requiring participation in sanctioned contests? Thoughts?
To me, that's a no-brainer. I think if some, and you know, too, someone could get shut down the week of that contest that they're scheduled to go to. So I say, as long as you sign up for a contest, if we're going to require it at all, that you're eligible for state.
Other thoughts?
And then if you can't go, you can't go.
Thank you, Michael.
That's really no different than our rain plan on sanctioned contests, Michael. If you sign up for a contest and it's rained out, we've already got this in place. And no coincidence, ever since we put that rule in place, a lot more contests get rained out than used to, because the band directors that are there say, you know, I really don't want to put my electronics in that rain. And the contest host goes, okay, everybody go home. Whereas it used to be they would push on because they needed it in order to qualify. In order to qualify. So in a fashion, that's already, if the contest cancels for whatever reason, you still get your credit.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Curtis?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Okay. And we've already addressed the idea of the option of uniforms and costumes that's already implied in our rules, so we don't need to cover that. Okay.
Okay, one thing about that, I'm sorry, I'm talking, I know.
Go ahead.
One thing about that, you know, one of the things in our KMEA guidelines is that as soon as they are finished with a practice, they're supposed to take a shower and they're supposed to change their clothes, you know, because of the soft surface and that kind of thing. If we do decide to go on with this, I think we need to stipulate to bands that they need to have a change of clothing and some kind of Ziploc bag to put whatever they wore for the performance and warm up and stuff in the Ziploc bag to maintain, you know, any virus that might have gotten in those clothes, you know, because long trip home, et cetera, and so forth.
Well, your long trip home, though, is with those same people that you were around while you were performing. You see what I mean? I think that the idea is that the bands at a competition site, even if all this works, you don't want your band mixing with the other band just among themselves. And then you're going to get on the bus with those exact same people. So that I'm kind of thinking maybe the current guideline which was borrowed from other places, was once you get home and you get away from all these people that you've been around, that's when you take your shower and get out of your clothes and so forth.
Anything else from anybody?
Just real quick, one thing that Joe mentioned got me thinking. Nothing that needs to be decided on now or discussed, but just a thought that needs to be out there for those hosting competitions is how they clean the recording devices when they get handed off from judge to judge or anything like that. Just something that needs to be thought about, the sanitation of those and handling of those, you know, just, again, nothing to discuss now, just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, David. Anybody else?
This is just a comment or two, going back to something that we've already discussed and doesn't need to really, I guess, be discussed any further. Just a comment from a fellow director in my district, informed me that KHSAA announced that they were installing equipment into the primary stadiums of the athletic teams to allow for live streaming. And would we be able to use those to allow live streaming of the contest? And with that being said, that could help potentially with the equity of equipment and whatnot, or at the very least could open up maybe a virtual class or a virtual option for those that couldn't travel to still be able to, whether they were a competing band or a non-competing band, to be able to get feedback.
I've noticed about those cameras you're talking about, Curtis. Absolutely, those are coming from the National Federation, in fact, and I think they have 40,000 of them, and they're going to give them to the schools, and they're really automatic. I think they can be set for a widescreen shot. I wondered about that same thing, if bands could be streamed from those, and it is a pay-per-view. It's fixed up like that too. So as that goes forward, we might want to get on that bandwagon.
Thank you. Anything else?
Having discussed, those cameras with my AD, he wouldn't go on the record or anything, but KHSA would like to have fans, but they are, I think they're a little bit less than hopeful and are kind of using those as as more of a, not necessarily a contingency plan, but, they want to have that in place for maybe an inevitable, crowd reduction or something like that. So
It's a national effort too. It's not just a Kentucky effort, but I bet KHSAA is where I did hear about that. It may have been the commissioner's superintendent's meeting last Tuesday, because it feels like it's been a few days since I heard about that, where Commissioner Tackett spoke to the superintendents, brought this up, and it's something that schools can go for. School does have to put some money into setting them up, but they get the equipment for free. I think for $2,500 they can set them up. Pretty sophisticated thing, and we'll see. Of course, if a school doesn't go for it, it's not there. It's only there if a school meets them halfway, more or less.
Okay. Any other comments relative to this? Okay. We've added a Roman numeral 8 on here that's simply titled, "How do we proceed?" I think I have expressed my feelings about how I think we should proceed. And so the floor is now open for your views on how you think we might proceed.
having spoken with my district, I think I would be doing a disservice if I didn't bring this up. They want to know what we plan to do now. So I would like to at least have some type of informal, go around the room and see what each district has, has presented to, our representatives and kind of see what, if we were to vote now, what each district would vote.
So you're saying this is a straw vote? Is that what you're saying, Grant?
Yes.
I'm wondering if a straw vote would be accurate from our districts right now without having a specific plan of what it would look like.
I think that has been my contention all along, is that this, we've discussed new things today. We've brought forth new information and possibilities, and we've talked about different scenarios. And so that information is new. And in my mind, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, I don't mind the idea of someone making a motion that that we set up a time where we decide whether this committee wants to move forward on trying to make marching band a possibility or not. I don't think this is the time right now to even take a straw vote, in my opinion. If others disagree with that, you're welcome to speak.
I disagree with that on behalf of my district. My district thinks we've waited too long to make a decision already. They're blowing up. They really are. They thought there was going to be a vote today. They wanted a vote today.
Why did they think there was going to be a vote today?
Because, I guess because they felt like we needed to vote today, because it has, for them, it's so late. It's late in the season. I mean, good gravy. Austin's already had a week of camp. I mean, people feel like if there's going to be a competitive season, they're behind. So I feel like representing my district, I would be doing a disservice if I didn't support Grant in asking for this straw poll, just to kind of see where we're going from here. I mean, it could be that the majority of people in everybody's district still want to compete. Then let's know that. But if the majority don't want to know that, then we are spinning people's wheels, and that's not fair to them.
My district as well just wants to know yes or no. They just want to know where we stand. They want a decision. They wanted a decision 2 weeks ago just on what are we going to do. They need to know if we're going to spend the money, let's spend the money. If we're not going to spend the money, then let's take care of our kids and teach them how best we can. That's what they want to know.
My district, the vast majority of my district, I'm looking through the poll now just to make sure I represent them, accurately. The vast majority of the district wants an answer. And if not today, they would like a date for when we'll get that answer.
And that is what I have suggested from the beginning of the meeting, that we set a date. You can decide how soon that meeting is. But Beth, you speak very strongly for your district, and I'm sure there are others that do as well, but I would be willing to bet that every constituent of every district has not had the opportunity to weigh in on their opinion on whether this group needs to move forward or not. And that's all I'm asking. And at the beginning of this meeting, I ask that you respect my wishes. And I would like for that to happen. Curtis, did you have something? No. Joe?
Tim, all I would say to it, obviously, if a decision isn't made today, I wouldn't wait much longer. Because I guess, again, I'm looking at it from a different lens on this. I feel like don't get me wrong, competitive marching band is a big deal to our kids, to us and our community, but we have a much bigger thing going on when it comes to all the things we've been talking about, what's going to go on with our school day. And if that result comes out Monday and it's negative for us, we need to be really conscious of that. I mean, that's, because marching band is not going to save your band program in the school day at most school districts. If it comes to where we can't play in classrooms and those kind of things for a semester, a year, whatever, even just on the surface of it, just not having sixth grade band for a year, those kind of things are going to have huge impacts on our program. So I guess in my brain, I've already kind of shifted more towards that. Like the marching band piece of it is really important, but that's to me is a much bigger fight. So we need to make this decision soon so we can concentrate our efforts on what we're going to be doing when the school day comes around, because districts are making their decisions right now We've already heard of districts that are saying they can't abandon a school day, and that's without the study. So hopefully that study saves us, but if it doesn't, we got to move on that fast.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay,
I'm open. Excuse me. What?
I would like to say two things to that. Okay, number one, you know, a lot of you guys, you either write your own drill and write your own music, or there's somebody in there in your staff that does that for you. Some of us have to farm that out to other people. And so, you know, we've got drill writers around that are waiting to hear something. And if, you know, there's going to take time, because once we tell them, you know, 17 other clients are going to tell them at the same time, and when are we going to get our drill and when are we going to get our music? So that's one point to think. The second thing is about the instruction. One of the things that I heard in one of the virtual things I attended was, you can't let your administrator think that you can't have band instruction during the school day just because you may not be able to play in the traditional setting. It is up to us to become creative and to think of ways that we can continue to have our students play. And of course, they can still practice at home. They can still play at home. They can send us virtual things, and then we can still have band instruction during the school day. My principal has even said, Beth, you can take them out into the football stadium during the school day and spread them out and all play together that way. I mean, you know, you've got to be creative. You've got to think outside of the box. One of the things that has been going around in my head and Tim's head is, you know, this gives us an opportunity to do more with chamber music during the school day, or during after school and that kind of thing, and work on developing individual musicianship. So I don't think that, I mean, we're going to have to be creative. We're going to have to help each other. We're going to have to just burst open all these PLCs and find out what these other people are doing to make sure that we can continue to have instruction during the school day. But that should not be contingent upon marching band. And I'll say it one last time, a competitive marching band season does not necessarily have to include regionals and state. Peace out.
I'm not here to decide whether we have marching band or not. As I told you before, that's not our goal here. But what I am saying is that, and if we can decide on a time after this meeting, sometime after this meeting, if you want it to be Tuesday, if you want it to be next week, whenever, that's pretty soon. But I don't think at this point in time, at this very time, that every single one of you has polled every single constituent, perennial, traditional marching band director to, Beth, you said you were through, to know exactly how they feel. Every constituent that has participated in the SMEC the last couple years. So, and when and if you can say that you have gotten that information, I would even suggest that when and if we do decide to vote, that it is, you have an actual number. You know, I've polled this many constituents in my district. Here's the vote, 16 to 2 or 4 to 5 or whatever it happens to be, so that we have some justification that it's accurate for something as big as this that has so many implications. So I am, again, suggesting that you come up with a date and a time after this meeting that we can agree on to decide whether this committee moves forward or not. That can happen in a very short amount of time, but I don't think it needs to happen right now at this very moment.
I'll agree with both of you on that. I think it is responsible to to have everyone's opinions voiced on this. I would suggest, giving it a week at max, because some people have started their season already. I would like to throw this out there to John. I would like to see something come from KMEA or a little help organizing some virtual professional development, things that we can share ideas with each other on how to make band relevant, things that we can do to make sure that we keep kids making music on an individual basis, chamber music, combos, whatever we can do so that our band programs are still relevant, even without a competitive marching band or even marching band at all, if it's not possible.
I think there are a number of resources out there, Corey, that are starting to be developed nationwide, because it's not just a Kentucky problem. And I think we very well should be able to draw some of those things together. I think, Con Selmer's got a whole thing going on it pretty shortly. And Texas Bandmasters for $100 is going to let you come to everything they've got at toward the end of the month when you're probably in band camp. But anyway, I think that's right. We have to support whatever's going on.
So, Corey, I'm hearing that as a motion to have some kind of vote a week from now. Is that what you're suggesting?
That's what I'm suggesting, yes.
Okay, could you put that in the form of a motion? And I don't want to tell you how to word it, but I would like for it to be somewhat worded in the respect of deciding whether the marching band committee should move forward on this or not. Not whether to cancel or not, but whether we should move forward or not. And my reason, my thinking behind that is that if indeed the vote is for the marching band not to continue in pursuit of trying to have a marching season, then it can go to the powers that be above us, the KMEA board or the band council or the executive committee. I'm not sure how that would work, John, but that they would take that information that we give from our vote and make a decision from that.
Okay, so I'd like to make a motion that we take a vote as a committee in 1 week as to whether or not we continue with the 2020 marching band season.
Do we have a second? Austin Brawley seconds. Discussion?
I would like to amend the motion.
Go ahead.
I would like to amend the motion to the vote being taken this Wednesday evening, because I think it needs to happen sooner. And I think that gives all of us today, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday day to be in touch with who we represent. I think that's plenty of time, and I think we need to move faster.
You may know this, Tim, but technically what you do if we get a second to Beth's motion to amend the motion that's on the table, then there can be discussion on that. And then you vote on the amendment, whether the motion should or should not be amended. And then you go, it's complicated, then you go and vote on the motion, either as it originally stood or as it has been voted into being amended. But your next thing would be to get a second to Beth's motion to amend.
Is there a second to Beth's motion to amend?
I'll second.
Have a second from Michael Stone.
Now there should be discussion, if there is any, beyond what Beth's presentation on the amendment to the motion.
So we're discussing whether on the idea of changing it to Wednesday of this next week. Comments?
Beth, I think you're right. I think that directors would like to, would probably be willing to get their opinion to their district representative and then like to see something move a little quicker. But I think it is important to take time to make sure that everybody is polling, as Tim said. Talk to everybody. Everybody needs to be heard from.
When we poll, do we simply just want to ask the question, are you in favor of canceling marching band or not? Because I think that all of our surveys should look very similar, if not the same.
The motion should read, the polling should be that should we proceed, should we vote in 1 week whether or not to, I don't know, Corey, you may have to help me out on this. But Tim asked that it be toward the direction that should the marching band committee proceed toward planning an SMBC of some sort. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's correct.
I have a question about when we poll the membership, if some schools have assistant directors, some do not, do we count each individual school as one vote? Or if you happen to have 2 directors, they get 2 votes? How should, I don't know if that's a discussion for this time, but how should we consider that?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts about that, and also about Michael's question on making sure that everybody asks the same thing. But I'm going to ask maybe, Austin, that we wait on that discussion until we can get a vote on whether or not to amend the initial motion, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so we're still discussing the idea of the amendment to having the vote on Wednesday rather than Saturday.
Not a lot to add, but I agree. I think that's enough time to poll if we haven't already done it. I mean, I've already done my district. I'll send it out again just for anybody who's watched this discussion to see if maybe their opinions have changed, because I think they might have. I don't think necessarily the way I vote changes, but it's different things to think and ponder. But I think that's enough time. If you're timely about it and you maybe get the poll out tonight or tomorrow.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, so we are, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but we're voting on whether to go with Beth's amendment of moving this to Wednesday to vote.
That would be right.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, we'll vote on the amendment. Probably I'll go around the room, you think?
I think.
Okay. So you're deciding whether this is to vote yes or no as to whether we would have a vote on the motion made by Corey Zilch of the marching band committee, or the vote to whether the marching band committee should continue to pursue ideas for having a marching season in 2020. District 1, it's a yes or no. Yes means yes, we'll change it to Wednesday. No means we will not. So District 1. District 1.
Okay, voting on the amendment. Yes, I vote we change it to Wednesday.
2.
Yes.
3.
Yes.
4.
Yes.
5.
Can I abstain?
You can.
There we go. Yes.
6.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
8.
Yes.
9.
Yes.
10.
Yes.
11.
Yes.
12.
Yes.
Patrick, did you abstain or vote yes? Just so I know.
I'll go ahead and say yes, because make it unanimous, make it easier on you.
Okay. All right. So it is unanimous.
Now you have a motion on the floor. And Corey, maybe we can restate the motion with the word Wednesday in the place of the word Saturday.
So we're going to be, the committee's going to be taking a vote this Wednesday as to whether or not we continue with plans for the 2020 marching band season.
Okay. And I guess we have to have a second to that too, right?
I'll second.
Okay. Michael Stone seconds.
Austin had seconded the original motion,
Oh,
and then it was amended. So he still remains as the second.
Okay. So we still need. So do we still need to go around the room again now? for this new motion?
Okay, are we going to discuss a minute?
Yes.
Briefly? Okay, because when we say go forward with the marching season, we have discussed a lot of different possibilities. So I'm assuming that all of those possibilities are part of this. Is that correct?
They are.
Okay, so it's not just, do we have state championships or not? It's like all the possibilities that we discussed about only maybe regionals, blah, 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 blah.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I suppose we all anticipate that some people would say, well, it depends on what it looks like. So they'll have trouble voting yes or no, unless they're just dead set against any of this, of course. But they'll have trouble saying yes, many of them, until they know what it's going to look like, which is, of course, that's what's difficult. If it was easy, we wouldn't be having this talk.
All right, and I have two questions. First, is this the appropriate time to ask about the school representation? One director, two directors, or should I wait?
I think you can go, well, no, we better okay this first.
Okay, and my second question, I don't know if this is an appropriate time yet or not, and I don't know if this is an appropriate question at all. At least in my polling, there are 3 or 4 programs that haven't competed in KMEA in years who responded to the polling. Now, I really am not sure how to word this and exclude those groups, but the groups that do KMEA on a consistent basis, I feel like are the ones that should have a little bit bigger say in whether we move forward. I don't know if that's the right political thing to say at this time, but the groups that don't have anything to do with KMEA on a regular basis, I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know if that's the right thing to say. Is anybody else on board with me and understand where I'm going with that?
I get it. I have a lot of
100%.
Okay, but are these groups that may be wanting to come back into KMEA? Because that's what we're trying to get going anyway.
Sure, that's a great question, and I don't want to exclude them if they do want to come back in. It's tricky.
Yeah.
I don't agree with excluding anyone from the conversation.
Yeah, I think a lot of the schools that are not involved in KMEA, because they feel like they really haven't had a vote, or their voice hasn't been heard in the past anyway. So this may be a chance to get them back in.
I've been thinking a little about the Google form that this might look like, right? Because it's kind of what you do. So I think that one thing is I think that we could come up with one Google form that could go to all the directors, and depending on, we can sort it by district, and you can look in and see what your district did. I mean, and you can talk to them. By all means, you should send them an email, but we could probably do that in one survey so that you can see the whole thing. I even think there's a way to configure it where if a person says District 6, you get an email to see the answer, to see what they answered, just as a prompt. So I would suggest that we might go that way. And the other part is we can have them indicate, two other parts. We can have them indicate whether they have participated in the last 2 years, let's say, if that's what we want to do, as one of the questions. And we can sort and see what kind of a difference that makes, just so we know, not to exclude. And the third thing is that there should be one vote per band. If it either needs to be the head director, on that recent survey I put, are you head director or not, so that I could, now the pie charts take both into account, but in the spreadsheet you can separate that out. So I'm going to guess that we should say head director only, please. So there's just one vote per band.
Is there a way for you to send it out only to head directors? Because I've had people text me going, can the middle school directors have a vote on this and stuff like that? So is there a way that it can just go out to the head directors?
Maybe, but it certainly can have a guidance in front of it that says only head directors, please. And if someone who's not a head director goes in, we can read through the answers. There's only going to be, 100 or so. And so we can read through and see if there's somebody who's honestly doesn't meet that qualification, and we can delete them from the results for the sake of the pie charts and for the sake of the spreadsheet.
So John, do I understand you correctly that really this is not, we're going to meet on Wednesday, and by the way, we still haven't voted on this finally, but Wednesday, it's just going to be a formality of what the survey results are. Would that be correct? It's not we go around the room and say, District 1, what is your vote? It will be the statistics that are in that survey. Am I right or am I wrong?
Well, it's the famous popular vote versus the Electoral College. The way a marching band committee decisions have been made traditionally is based on one vote per KMEA district. As we know, some representatives represent 1 or 2 bands, and some represent, I don't know, as many as 10 or 12 bands, just depending on the district. But that's been the way. So we can see, you can see the popular vote, and that's okay to know. And it's probably important to know, because no matter what district you're from, if you're not coming, we're not gonna, we're not serving you. And if you are coming, we are serving you. So that might be instructive, but as far as going around the room and taking a vote, that still is probably how you should go, because that's how it's gone since 1986.
Sure, okay, that's fine. So we would go around the room and the district rep would say, could say, this is the way my district voted. I had 16 for, 14 against, and so on. Would that be an accurate statement?
That'd be fine.
Okay. All right. So just to be clear, we have not finished the actual vote on this. We've had an amendment. We've okayed the amendment to have it on Wednesday. We've had discussion. We had the amendment made, and now we need to actually officially vote that we will do this on Wednesday. So is there a motion for that?
Tim, before we do this, am I to understand that once this vote is made, let's say that when Wednesday comes and goes, that the official vote is to not continue forward with the marching band season, does that mean that this committee no longer meets to discuss any sort of performance opportunity? I feel like what we're voting to poll people on is a little broad, because like Pauletta has said, there's been a lot of different things thrown out, a lot of different options thrown out. Would people want to proceed with the marching season if there was a non-competitive element completely, like there's no competition at all, it's just for a rating? Or what are we exactly polling these people on? Because I think what we're asking right now is pretty broad.
Well, maybe we need to change the way it's worded then. David, you starting to say something?
No, I didn't.
David Graham.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
So I will make a second amendment to the motion that on Wednesday, the marching band committee will vote on whether to continue planning a regional / state marching band competition event.
I'm thinking on that for a minute. David, what were you going to say? David Graham.
I was going to agree with Curtis that we have talked about a lot of things, and I think there's consensus among this group around some of them. But just like state championships in general, we haven't polled anybody about it. So what the survey might look like is it might include some of the things we've talked about. If quarterfinals were the culminating event, would that make you more likely to participate? Less likely? No bearing. The same with 4 judges. The same with 4 judges paid for by KMEA. I think we could include some of those things in our polling. Information is good, information also can be confusing. I know we all want an up or down, black or white, this is what we're going to do. But I think if we can limit it to, say, 5 or 6 questions that we ask people, then we can come back together Wednesday with more information. Now, all that said, this meeting's still going on. We haven't adjourned. We've got a motion on the floor. Actually, we've got 2 on the floor right now. One waiting for a second. This group could decide some of those things today if you feel like we're ready to, but I'm not sure we're there yet. But I do think, for it to have the validity it needs, this survey needs to have at least several of those questions asked on it. Are you okay with quarterfinals being the culminating event? And would that make you more likely to participate? Would you be okay with only 4 judges? And would you be, especially for hosts, if KMEA paid for the judge expenses, would that make it better or worse for you? And we may find out that none of those things matter. We may find out that there's just an overwhelming amount of our constituents that have just determined it's just too much to do, but at least then we'll know. And we may find out that there's a significant portion that think those accommodations would work, I think those accommodations are worthwhile, and then it's worth going forward. But we won't really know unless we ask.
Yeah, I like the thoughts that David's thinking about here. I think we should kind of keep it broad, and we might find out in the survey that maybe we can just have some sanctioned contests without a state championship, or a state championship without sanctioned contests, or some kind of combination. Or maybe we find out in the survey we can't have any of that at all, and that's when we just need to make the choice next week whether we continue or not. And if we decide based on the survey that maybe we can do some kind of partial thing, then we decide, okay, we'll move forward by having one element or all of them if we can, or whatever the combination of that might be.
Okay, I'm not smart enough to gather all this information and decide where we go from here, so I'm going to ask for a little bit of guidance. We do have an amendment from Beth that has not been seconded. You want to repeat that again, Beth? Or that has not been, seconded. Go ahead.
My amendment was that we add to the original motion the words in planning a regional / state marching band event.
Is there a second? Hearing no second, that motion dies. So, where are we? So it pertains to Curtis's ideas and David's too, about, it's pretty broad. Do we incorporate some of the things that we've talked about into our survey?
Yes. Yeah, I think because it's such a broad motion that we do need to make sure that our survey does include those details.
I'm going to suggest that instead of making this specific about just the SMBC, that I'm going to suggest that the wording we use is regarding whether or not we should create the task force to make a proposal for the competitive season. That way we could put all of the questions of things that we've asked about in here with the underlining question, with these things considered, should we put together a plan for what competition should look like, or should we not?
Thank you, Jenny. So would that, by just simply saying task force, would we still need to list the things that we're talking about as options and possible things that can happen?
I think if we go the task force route, and put that language in there, I think we're just prolonging any decision, which is not going to make our our district's very happy.
Isn't this the task force?
Well, no, when we did the guidelines that we submitted to the governor and public health, there was a task force made up of 5 of us, I believe, 5 members. And then we brought that to this committee and then discussed it and then fine-tuned it and then submitted that. So there was a task force involved, and it's simply just to, you know, whenever you have an ad hoc or task force committee, it's you have a fewer number, fewer engines in the powwow. So that's the way that works.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, I wouldn't put the task force thing in the meeting, Jenny, because that's something that can be at the pleasure of the chair. That he can at any time put together a task force that can then come back to the marching band committee with a recommendation, at which time it can be discussed. And the reason to do that is the group dynamics. It doesn't get quite so bogged down. It doesn't maybe think of everything, but it's at least you try.
Okay.
Okay.
So go ahead, Pauline. Go
So
ahead.
what's the motion that we're supposed to be voting on right now?
Well, that's what we're trying to decide.
Okay.
We're trying to decide whether we want to add more information other than just having the marching band committee move forward. David Graham brought forth the ideas, and others agree that we need to make sure that our constituents understand that we are exploring options. The idea of maybe having quarterfinals be the final event, and maybe okaying the idea of just 4 judges in the press box, and contest hosts are paid, their judges are paid for. So those are items that probably constituents, if they knew that, it might let them think about a little deeper whether it's a possibility or not. So my question then, being the idiot here, is how do we incorporate that into the motion? Can we do
Tim,
that?
I don't think we have to. I think we can just simply vote now to hold a vote on Wednesday moving forward. And then we can discuss the specifics of the survey.
Yes, I agree 100% on that. I think all that other stuff we need to talk about if it's going into the survey that John's going to send out. And speaking of surveys, my 2 cents, because you know I give it, is I hate most of these surveys because the answers that I want are not there, or, you know, they're not, it's too cut and dry. So just put that in your thoughts. Thank you.
I generally try to, if possible, leave an other, which gives you an option to put in your so-and-so. It's like, it doesn't help with the pie charts because then that's just one vote on that, you know, but or sometimes I put a comment section afterwards. So you can give the best answer, but then qualify it with a comment. So we certainly will try to do that. You learn a lot from the comments sometimes.
Okay. Corey, would you one more? I'm sorry.
John, I'm wondering if instead of putting other as a possible answer, maybe you can put can't answer at this time, and then let people put their comments in a separate comment section. I think it's hard to get a good read from other, because like when Tim was talking in the beginning and he was talking about the pie chart, and he said, you know, 50% said other, and this many said yes, and then this many said no. He kind of seemed to, and it could just be because of my slant, seemed to slant that other toward being possibly a yes, but other can possibly be a no.
Okay,
so I
yeah,
think
sure.
it's better just to say can't answer this time.
I'll let you look at the survey before I send it out, but sorry, and we can get back to the motion. That turned into I let it too. I helped it become a bunny trail. And I beg your pardon.
So Corey, would you one more time state the motion? And we already have a second, and then we'll vote on it.
Okay. I feel like I've changed the wording of this each time I've said it because I'm not looking at it, but essentially the marching band committee's going to be taking a vote on Wednesday as to whether or not we continue with plans for the 2020 marching band season.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. Let's take an official vote, please. District 1.
Yes.
2.
Yes.
3.
Yes.
4.
Yes.
5.
Yes.
6.
Yes.
7.
Yes.
8.
Yes.
9.
Yes.
10.
Yes.
11.
Yes.
12.
Yes.
So the motion carries, and there will be a vote taken on Wednesday. Okay. Any other questions about that particular aspect? Excuse me. Okay. I know that, John, you said that George had something he wanted to share with us before we adjourn. Is that, George, you with us?
What time is that vote going to happen?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Excuse me, George. Yeah, we probably need to.
Okay.
Sorry. So Wednesday, I know some of you are in rehearsals of some kind. What do you think? Somebody throw a time out there.
Name a time, Tim, and we should make it work for us.
Okay. And if folks are in the middle of some kind of rehearsal, maybe noon Eastern time, is that on Wednesday?
When?
Wednesday at noon Eastern time? Any objections to that? Any problems with that? Okay, I don't think we need to vote on that. If there's no objections, we'll have that meeting on Wednesday at high noon Eastern time. All right, George.
Hey, listen, guys. Thanks. First of all, thank you for all of you all's comments. A lot of the questions that I had today have been answered really quite well, and some opinions that I had not, or some things I had not thought about. I appreciate hearing about those. So I'm thankful for that, and the leadership that is within KMEA. I'm going to go back to what was said at the very beginning. KMEA is not even really this marching band council. It's the membership itself. And so I would encourage you to reach out to the membership and find out what they're really thinking. And then you do your due diligence and report back. I've been contacted in the last week or so about one thing that I didn't hear a lot of discussion about, and it's, you know, the thing that the folks have spoken to me about is that the energy and stress associated with starting the season like we typically have in the past is really taking a toll on them as people and as caretakers of their students. And so I would encourage to move forward here to determine what we're going to do or what we're not going to do. I think that's important. It also would give those people who are more perhaps dealing with some social emotional things, some energy to free up to think about how they might start the year without marching band, or with how it may be in its state for the year of 2020. It's ironic. I'm driving to South Carolina. I'm in that county where I started teaching 34 years ago, and I'm sorry I'm here. But anyway, this is awful, the pandemic, and we are smart people for dealing with it. But it's going to get over with. I am not defined in my career by dealing with the year of 2020. And I think I'm a much better educator maybe because of 2020, because I've had to think about different things that I've never had to think. And you're doing that in many ways. But continue to think about that. Reach out to each other. Boy, in my day, and I know, I'm sorry, Tim, me and you and perhaps a couple others and John, we would have, because we weren't so competitive, we would have other band directors come in and visit and rehearse our groups. And then we would go and rehearse their groups. And so whatever this turns out to be, use this as a time to reach out to your colleagues to make this a stronger organization. We are so much in our ivory towers, and that's not a joke. We are as also as in the high school marching band movement of the haves and the have-nots. So maybe the haves can help some of the have-nots. There's a lot more have-nots than there are haves. And again, I just appreciate everyone's contributions. And if I can help, I'm excellent at Zoom meetings. So again, thank you. I look forward to our meeting on Wednesday.
Thank you, George. Is there anything else?
Tim, I have two quick things, one for you and then one for John. Just so I make sure I know I'm on the right on this. So for the first one for you is that, do we need to make a statement from this council about guidance for practice between now and Wednesday? Or is the guidelines that we have in the document, do we stay in the last phase that we were just in? The model, what's going on with KHSAA, the phase 3 of the document after July 12th, that most of those things that are in there are not in line with what's going on from the athletic guidelines.
So go ahead, John.
Well, that's really hard, and I kind of struggle with that as this 12th, July 12th, July 13th has crept up on us. When we wrote that document, it seemed like a long time away, and it took forever to even get the thing approved. It was July 4th. So now the thinking was at the time, like I know we were thinking, well, but then we'll know more and we'll know what to do next. I think that it is possible, it's probably likely that KMEA should recommend that schools stick with the pre-July 12 guidance for a few days. I'm not real sure where to go and what to see about what's going on with the state guidance. I know where to look. I just haven't done it yet. It's complex. The state guidance and how we can comply with that and recommend that our directors comply with that in the coming 2 weeks. I don't know that I doubt this committee has enough information to do anything now. Maybe by Monday we can have a little better bead on that. And I know that means we've already overlapped into what was supposed to be. But that's my non-answer, I think.
Did you have something else, Joe?
Yeah, the only other thing was just, well, there's actually two, I guess, to it. John, I guess, have you heard anything about the crossover with the mask ordinance from the governor for indoor space? If bands are planning on having camps next week, are they going to be able to play their instruments inside, or they're going to have to wear masks? And then the other part of it, just so you know, is do I need to schedule a band council meeting after this or not? I guess we can talk about that afterwards, but I just want to get that in your brain of procedural, what I need to do for next week.
Yeah, it's probably a good idea that we start talking about doing that council thing. There's been no guidance available yet for playing inside at all. And so I wouldn't recommend doing it. We hope the study will give us a little bit of information that we can base a standard on. But and we hoped at the time when this thing all started that was going to be done sooner, but science has its delays sometimes. So you can imagine how the choral people feel, because theirs doesn't come out for 2 more weeks. Anyway, so I don't think playing indoors is recommended. I know playing indoors would not be recommended. I'm pretty sure Dr. White at the Department of Public Health would say, we don't have any reason to think that's safe yet. Let's be waiting on that. That's my take.
But groups are doing that now, right? If they're planning on having camps next week, I'm sure that they're not going to do it all outside. Some of them have been working on things inside, right?
I don't know. I understand the speculation. It wouldn't surprise me that people are working outside of state compliance guidelines, and this is a serious disease. They shouldn't be doing that.
I guess just seeing that, because I remember on the next phase, it said 50 individuals inside or outside. So on the current document that we put together for the next phase. So
Was it playing inside?
I thought it was playing inside on the next phase of this, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess just, you know, if we're waiting till Wednesday and people are starting camps next week, they get guidance from this is, I guess, what I think.
That is a serious thing we do need to be trying to help people with, that's for sure.
I'm looking at a chat from Curtis to everyone. Have y'all seen that? Will this survey be anonymous? Survey should see if groups want to have no season, have no competitive season, have a competitive season with no SMBC, have a competitive season with SMBC, etc. Curtis, you still there? Curtis, are you there?
Tim, it said his phone died.
Yeah, it's cutting out. I can see it.
Yes.
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I've had some people ask me, would the survey be anonymous or not? And we're strongly suggesting that it should be, so that people can voice their opinion without any repercussions there. And then I want to make multiple times this meeting that I'm about having options and everybody figuring out what's best for them and based on their situation, to say, hey, we're having no competitive season at all. And, you know, I want to make sure that we're giving the membership all the different scenarios that could be as they, you know, I don't think it's as black as white as we're either doing this or we're not. I think there's different areas of gray in there, different ways that this could be done to get performance opportunities for various groups. So I hope that's going to be communicated in that way or something similar.
You know, Tim, in order to, Curtis, in order to make sure that everyone is who they say they are and that they are the head director of whatever school in whatever district, it cannot be anonymous to me anyhow.
But the results being shared.
Right. We can, as far as sharing the results, whatever the marching band committee's pleasure is, and I would like to know, it would, in some ways, it would help you understand what you're dealing with if you know who you're talking about. But in other ways, I think maybe some of the sentiment is, I want to give my opinion, but I'd rather not out myself as having that opinion, possibly something. I hope that's fair.
Okay.
Tim, I think we need to be really clear. The executive committee's talked about this a few times. I'm not sure that we can cancel the whole season. I think in our discussions, we've talked about that we control the state marching band championships for finals and semifinals. But we need to be clear among ourselves if we can cancel sanctioned contests before we discuss whether we want to or not.
Therefore, Curtis's A and B wouldn't need to be on the survey, David? Is that where you're going?
If I'm understanding it right, yes. My understanding has been, regardless of what KMEA says, if a local school wants to have their contest, they can have it.
I think you're right.
I agree.
Okay. Well, and that's something we should be clear with people about.
I think you're right.
John, do you feel like you have the information you need to form this survey?
No, not really. I appreciate that Curtis put in the chat some sort of a direction on some things. I kind of need some more questions. I think I'd like for David Graham had a real good sense of some things like that. Maybe the thing to do to put this together would be to do it by a group email where people reply to all and include me. And that way I can collect these various questions in written form. And the sooner you do that, the better. I can start putting the survey together and just getting it ready. I'd like to send it out tonight. I know people would like to see it tonight. But I'd like to have written proposals of questions to manipulate around and, you know, play with. So I have a lot, but I don't think I have the final 10%.
Okay, so please submit those questions that you'd like to see on there to John in short order. Anything else?
I just guess I come back to the guidelines thing for next week.
Yeah, Joe, you're asking if I understand what you were talking about before. 3 phases that came out of this committee went through July 12th. July 13th was continuation to the next phase. So would this committee need to make a statement of, okay, we're continuing because we don't have any new information. We're continuing phase 3. Phase 3 is now moved to the next, you know, whatever date is picked until, you know, the results of the study can be reviewed, or do we just go 1 week at a time? Okay, we're continuing this phase for 1 more week until we learn more information. I don't know. I'm kind of there with you, Joe. I think there needs to be something because right now KMEA, the guidance that KMEA has given to districts that are looking towards KMEA for band rehearsals has just ran out. So something needs to continue on.
Okay, so I would suggest that we, again, align this probably with KHSAA, that things continue in the phase 3 that we are about to enter into through.
David Graham just said possibly phase 2, and that might be a good idea because KHSAA just rolled things back a little bit because we were seeing an uptick in cases.
I'm sorry, I meant phase 2, yeah. So continue that through August 2nd, like KHSAA. That probably needs to be in the form of a motion. Does it, John? Or is this just?
What concerns me is I don't think I have a full sense of all the rationale for what KHSAA did. And I think in fairness to our directors, I need at least, maybe somebody here does, have their mind around what led to that. And is it any different from music than it was than it was for sports? I think it's probably right that the recent uptick in cases has gotten the Department of Public Health rightfully concerned. But I don't know about that discussion. I don't think this committee has enough information to give a policy or policy-esque direction on what to do about that guidance. I think we do need to do something as soon as possible, but I don't think we know enough right now to be sure. I suspect it might very well be what David said about just staying in phase 2 due to things. But I just think we need to know a little bit more, and I guess I'd appreciate maybe the direction to look into it and to act accordingly.
I'm not sure I know how to proceed from here.
I don't think this committee should take action on the matter. I don't think we know enough. And it's going to be either reckless because we say go on to phase 3, or it's going to be overly restrictive if we say stay on with phase 2 until we have a resource to draw from other than what KHSAA did. Fine people doing good stuff and paying attention and very student-centered. It's really good. The conversations at those meetings is high quality. But I would not be able to defend any action now because we don't have the data. It's all been very recent. Maybe just yesterday that we kind of found out things were getting pushed back to August 3rd. We haven't had time to react to that.
Okay.
John, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you on this because I feel like within our school districts, if the athletics have done this, they're basically the commission. I'm just looking at the Courier article from the Courier Journal, and it says, this is from Julian Tackett, it does not appear wise to take any steps toward allowing more activity than has currently been allowed since June 29th because of the COVID-19 pandemic. High schools are currently allowed to have no contact practice groups of 50 people or less. The KHSA also voted Friday to limit athletes to 6 hours of practices per week through August 2nd. Our goal is starting school on time. That's where we have to keep our focus. We want to minimize exposures. So if we don't fall in line with something like that, schools are going to make most people do that anyway, but I think it's almost reckless of us not to go with that, considering how big of a body that is and instead of not going forward, obviously not opening anything up, but basically saying we're not going to move forward from where we currently are because of where the state of things are in Kentucky. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Like we're just, it's not that we're adding or saying we need to go forward with anything, just we're going to stay where we've been and we're not going to change anything.
I agree with Joe. I mean, I don't know how we vote on that and enforce it, but I feel like it keeps us in line with what KHSA is doing. And that's a lot of what the committee we met last month to put all this together. It was to try to be as in line with KHSA and the state as possible. And I feel like staying in phase 2 would do that, personally.
I think it would give KMEA credibility with the administrators and with the community at large.
I strongly suspect all of this is correct, and I strongly suspect KMEA should stay in phase 2 or recommend that schools stay in phase 2. I don't have enough data to say that conclusively, and I'd like to gather more data because this just came out yesterday, and I haven't had a moment to deal with that or even the 6-day thing. So if we do that, I'm going to have people call me and say, you don't have any reason to do that. You're restricting my thing, but all you're doing is just following the lead of KHSAA. And I do trust them. I just think we don't have enough data, and I don't think it'll take long to figure that out, but we're trying to do 5 things at once here.
And I think it is a really tough position, John. I've said this a million times. I wouldn't want to sit in your chair for all the money in the world. But I guess the concern for me is that if we don't say something, then what are people going to do next week? And what happens to those band directors if something goes, if they're like, if it goes badly for them, I guess, what do we do in that position?
Let me try it this way. How about we wait until tomorrow, during which time I'll look at it. You guys look at it. Send me anything, and then how about Joe and David and Tim and I get together either by email or by Zoom tomorrow if we can find a time. Email if we can't find a time, and establish what KMEA needs to say going forward if this committee can trust the 4 of us to look at that and come up with a reason that we can stand on other than only that KHSAA went forward. And not act today because all we've done is seen what KHSAA has done, but do this before Monday.
Everybody okay with that? Any objections? Okay. I have nothing else on the agenda. Any last comments from anybody? All right. The next time we will meet will be Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Pauletta gives a thumbs up. We have a second.
Second.
Beth seconds. Those in favor, just say aye.
Aye. Aye.
We'll see you Wednesday. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys. Meeting's over. Party's over. Have a wonderful weekend. Let me know if I can do anything for you in the future. Hopefully, it'll be able to stream from now on.